Hello and welcome to another quarantine stream. I am, of course, JoeMagician, and today I have another exciting topic and guest for you while we're all stuck indoors, trying our best not to go crazy. Last week, poor Quentin of Notacast joined me for an extensive look at the soulless black hole of evil known as Euron Greyjoy. This week, though, we're going to change gears a little bit, and we'll be going south from the Iron Islands to the fabulous castle Starfall, nestled in the Red Mountains of Dorne. We have the ancient and mysterious as a Valyrian Sphinx, House Dayne. Joining me today is none other than the fandom's, I would say, most passionate Dayne supporter and owner of her very own Ashara Dayne themed Spotify playlist, Chloe of the Girls Gone Canon podcast. Very excited to have you on today to talk about what is, I would say, our biggest crossover in interests in the Song of Ice and Fire fandom.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
We've talked before about Aemon, but now we're going down. We're getting the Dayne juices flowing.
This is like our common ground. This is before we even knew each other. We were writing about House Dayne. So
we knew each other from afar. It's like that person gets Dayne, even though I don't know who they are.
They get me. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. We had you on back in John with what's that guy called? What's his name that you like? Was it
Aegon, right?
Shaman Targaryen?
No, Aenys.
Aenys. What's his name? Who is it? What is his name?
Oh, just Maester Aemon, the guy that made it so far in Davos's Fingers tournament that I am so proud of. Our little Aemon. He got knocked out. Nobody thought he was going to win, but look how far he got.
Hey, I feel you. I'm repping mine today because I know he's going to go down too in flames, unfortunately. But
there's nothing you can do about that.
But I'll go down with him. God damn it! I'll go down with him.
go down something with Sandor.
Listen.
So I thought a good place to start with the Danes of Starfall, how they are kind of introduced to us all the way back in a Game of Thrones Catelyn 2, and how they are kind of immediately inserted into what the primary mystery of the book series, which is Jon Snow and RLJ. Chloe, I think this is probably one of your favorite passages. You want to read it?
Ned would not speak of the mother, not so much as a word, but a castle has no secrets, and Catelyn heard her maids repeating tales they heard from the lips of her husband's soldiers. They whispered of Sir Arthur Dayne, the sword of the morning, deadliest of the 7 knights of Aerys' Kingsguard, and of how their young lord had slain him in single combat. And they told how afterward Ned had carried Sir Arthur's sword back to the beautiful young sister who awaited him in a castle called Starfall on the shores of the summer sea. The Lady Ashara Dayne, tall and fair with haunting violet eyes. It had taken her a fortnight to marshal her courage, but finally, in bed one night, Catelyn had asked her husband the truth of it, asked him to his face. That was the only time in all their years that Ned had ever frightened her. "Never ask me about Jon," he said, cold as ice. "He is my blood, and that is all you need to know. And now I will learn where you heard that name, my lady." She had pledged to obey, she told him, and from that day on, the whispering had stopped, and Ashara Dayne's name was never heard in Winterfell again.
Wow. That's an introduction to House Dayne if I ever heard it. Arthur, Ashara, Jon, Ned, the Tower of Joy, very early on in the books. And from this quote, we are told 2 of the most significant members of the Danes in the story, which is obviously Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, and Lady Ashara Dayne with the haunting purple eyes. And that they and their house are really deeply intertwined with the story that George is telling us. As Gurm tells us, though, before we go north, we must go south. To reach the west, we must go east. This is kind of a tongue twister, isn't it? To go forward, we must go back. And to touch the light, we must pass beneath the shadow. And the Danes are no different. To understand where they are going, we must start back. And the Danes go all the way back. They go back as far as it goes, apparently. From what little information we're given about their founding, they go back to the Dawn Ages, which may as well be infinity as far as George is concerned. So far back, there's no real record of where they came from. And it's just kind of weird. Even older than the Age of Heroes, they're like one of the primal houses in Westeros. And a lot of these houses tend to trace their origins back to maybe like one particular person. You get a lot of Garth Greenhands. You get like House Bulwer and their Bull guy. You get Brandon Stark. Danes don't even have that. They don't have a person. They don't have some mythical figure that they're really descending from. Not even somebody so old maybe they lost their name. Their story is the weirdest one, I would say, in A Song of Ice and Fire, and that is they followed a falling star to an island on the Torrentine River, found a magic rock, and said, "You know what? This is our home now." What the hell, Chloe? What's going on?
Yeah, they literally we worship moon rock. Ha ha. No, it is weird, right? It has a lot of different magical elements that really come to mind with it. And I know we kind of got a little, watered down with magic if you haven't reread the books lately and you're going off the show mostly. But there's so much magic in the books, and the Danes seem to kind of be at the mouth of it. Like, not just at the mouth of the Torrentine, but at the mouth of all the magic. I think there's a lot of connections they have with possibly like a first come kind of Valyrian-esque thing, but I don't think they're proto-Valyrian like a lot of people do. I really do think there's a huge mixing of blood going on here.
Oh yeah, definitely. And even their ancient origins, the idea of like chasing after a falling star, I mean, that's happening in the current story too. We see the bleeding red star or the red wanderer that's going across Westeros, and everybody is sort of seeing that as like, this is my time. This is now my future. This means everything for me. And you can sort of see that here with the Danes. It's like, well, a lot of people probably followed a comet or some sort of meteor or something like that. Although not many of them have, found where it landed and then said, you know what? I'm making a cool sword from that. Very Avatar-like. Big Sokka energy making the space sword. And one thing that's extremely similar to this, I wrote about this a few years ago on Reddit. It was called, because I'm so clever, I called it Dane, What's in a Name? And it actually goes back to that this origin story of the Danes is nearly identical to the origin stories from Lord of the Rings, the mythical humans known as the Edain. Or actually, that's probably not how you pronounce it. It's probably like Edain or something weird like that because it's Tolkien. But essentially, they did the same thing. They followed the star. Followed the star Eärendil until they found the island in the shape of a 5-pointed star and named it Numenor, which is where we get the Numeronians, where Aragorn's lineage comes back to. But then after, they ended up leaving Numenor because the gods cursed them and blew it up and blah blah blah. They go to mainland Middle Earth. They found the kingdom of Arnor, and then finally gets split into 3 smaller kingdoms. The names are kind of whatever, except for the third one. The third one's really interesting. So you get Cardolan, Rudar, and then Arthur Dayne. It's right there. It's one to the other, very much telling us from George that these are ancient people. They are magical. He wants you to think Lord of the Rings. He wants you to think high fantasy, and he wants you to know that they are extremely intertwined with the magical side of this world by making that kind of reference. And you had some other really cool ideas about where their name comes from.
Yeah, George has done a lot of great work as far as Arthurian kind of emotions behind the Dane, right? They really are, and I think a lot of the Rebellion has that feel of that Arthurian romance. You already have Arthur of the Round Table, right? Nothing, that's basically nothing exciting, but there is a lot of etymology with House Dane, like right down to Ashara. I think George was very strongly pulling from Ashera or Atharat, the goddess, basically consort of God, of El, the supreme god of Canaan and father of Baal. And Atharat can technically be translated. There's a couple translations depending on if you're looking at it through Israel or what you're looking at it through, but basically it's Lady of the Sea or she who walks on sea. So you can't really tell me George wasn't thinking about that when they were named. And it gets weirder than that because you even have, considering Illyria Dane, Illyria, which is kind of the tribes from northwest of Macedonia. It's kind of a problematic phrase, but the Greek called them Illyrians, but basically anyone in Yugoslavia or what's now Albania. And It means land of the free or freedom land in Albanian origin, but the meaning of Illyria is described by Illyrians with an I as from the stars.
Aha.
Yes.
There
So
it is.
there it is. It's very much so George chose star names for all of this.
I would say maximum star names. He's doing everything he can to point at them and be like, look at all these weird things. Look how much they love stars. Look how much they love magic. Look at all this stuff. And it's like, by the way, these are deeply involved with my story and you need to understand them. It's kind of like the others show up and they scare you with their fantasy and their zombies. The Danes show up and are kind of serving a similar purpose. They're showing up with a high fantasy background, high fantasy characters and origins, and it's the same thing. He's trying to remind you this isn't just like people running around playing Crusader Kings 2. Like this isn't just politics and war. There is a heavy element of magic, which the Danes really symbolize early on the non-terrifying side, I would say.
Yeah, more of a very mystical stars and moons and no one quite knows.
Their origins lost to the sands of time. Oh, sands of Dorne. Yes. I went there. And there's even something in where they choose to live, and that tells us really how old and how magical they are. And that is that they live in the Red Mountains of Dorne on an island in the middle of the Torrentine River. I don't have to tell you guys how much, if you've played Crusader Kings 2, how much this area sucks to try and like be a conqueror, try to build anything from. There's almost no agriculture. There's no natural resources. They're not like Castle Rock where they got a gold mine in the back where they're using it to build power. It's not even really that populated. Basically, all they really have is the Red Mountains and the deserts of Dorne to protect them. And that's kind of it. But if you look at, hang on, I have a picture here that we can show.
Yes.
Oh. This is what George imagined Starfall to look like. Does this look like something that's like from a poor, low-populated, resource lacking area? No, this looks like an incredible fantasy castle, the kind of thing you'd see in The Reach. Like this should be something that one of the greatest lords in Westeros lives in. But no, this is where the Danes live in the worst part. It's kind of strange that way. I think it really shows a downward progression in power from probably where they used to be in the Dawn Ages, or even the Age of Heroes.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you consider their fall from Nemeria's Landing, right? Mm-hmm. There's so many. I mean, they were kind of on top of the world. There was no one ruler. Wealth was aplenty for those that tried to strike out and grab it. You have Samwell Starfire Dane sacking Old Town, Joffrey sieging Old Town, Davos Dane marrying Queen Nymeria, which that was a huge thing, obviously, to secure power. But that was also pretty much a last step. Well, this saves us from all going to the wall.
Yeah.
Because all the other kings went to the wall. Those who kneel didn't.
Yeah. Vorian got sent there. And it's also... it kind of tells you that Dorne probably used to be different. You hear from the Hammer of Waters that the swamps of the Cranogmed, probably your second favorite area in Westeros, didn't used to be there. That the Hammer of Waters fell and then the swamps arrived. Well, if we also hear that the Arm of Dorne was broken behind the Andals when they invaded, maybe there's some sort of climate change thing going on. Maybe there's some sort of long-term reason that Dorne has become the desert it is now. And in the long past, yeah, they probably could have supported the kind of family that would have built Starfall, that would have been the sort of family that's conquering Dorne, going into the Reach and punching in the high towers in their faces and taking all their stuff, which they really can't do anymore. Yeah, I think it says a lot about George's idea of where the Danes have been and where they are now as sort of a narrative idea.
Yeah, you see it even when you look at the rebellion, right? The Danes were kind of right-hand men following the Martells. Mm-hmm. And also you see Arthur being part of the Kingsguard. You think about Jaime, who joined the Kingsguard. Arthur joining the Kingsguard, maybe it was because he was an amazing knight, but could there be something there, between the families? Could there be something to look at further? Is this a Targaryen versus Dane thing happening? A Martell and Targaryen versus Dane? I mean, it's a power play, right? They no longer had real power. That was their grab on power.
Absolutely. And the rivalry between the Danes and the Martells continues to this day. I mean, we'll get to him later with Darkstar and his of the night stuff. But the kings of the Torrentine have not forgotten that Nymeria made them give up their crown and their power in the area. And they continue even long after it seems like Dorne has changed for the worse in terms of being what we think of as a prosperous nation state. Like, is this actually something I was wondering when I was looking at the map of Dorne, and especially like Old Town in that area? Doesn't it look like there should have been a harbor right up where Starfall is? There's a little inlet right there. And if the Torrentine now is awful, it's like rapids, it's way too fast. What if it wasn't in the past? What if when they built there, it was idyllic and it was a slow moving trade river and that little town sitting right there, a trade port, and maybe that's how they built their power. But 10,000 years later, that's all gone.
Yeah, it is, especially, again, playing CK2. It is literally set up like it should have a nice little port right there you should be making trade money with. But alas, I'm curious about that. I bet they would have had. I mean, they had a whole kingdom. It's almost like a forgotten marble kingdom.
Yeah, it's kind of like Old Stones in the way where it's like, what if the Muds were still around? Well, they would probably be sucking kind of like the Danes do now. No offense to the Danes. I'm very sorry, Chloe. They are effectively sucking these days. They are not the high-born kings anymore. They're kind of just mid-tier nobles in Dorne, which isn't even that powerful.
But wait, let me just hold on, Dr. Professor Magician. Are you saying that feudalism is good? Because that's what it sounded like.
Oof, is feudalism good? That is a great question. No, it sucks.
You were.
But it doesn't even seem like they're set up that well anymore to succeed in that system. Whereas other houses, especially after the arrival of the Martells, really latched onto that. But one big question about the Danes that always comes up, and every person that reads A Song of Ice and Fire goes on Reddit and makes this post, are they Valyrians? Because they certainly look like it, and they certainly kind of act like these weird elvish creatures. They have their purple eyes, the pale skin. They sometimes still have silver and gold hair or white hair like the Targaryens do. And yet, George has been loath to confirm that in a way that he really hasn't with the other Westerosi Valyrian houses. Like, you ask him about the Velaryons and the Celtigars, he's like, oh yeah, they're Valyrians too. I know exactly where they came from in Valyria. You ask him about the Danes, and he's like, whoa. You can't take that stuff seriously. And we actually have a quote here from an old chat from the dark ages of the internet. George was answering questions. Can you imagine that? Him doing a live chat and people getting to ask him questions? Wouldn't that be great?
My God, stop. That would be awful for him. I'm so sorry, George. We don't deserve you. None of us.
We don't deserve you. So this is actually between Ran or Elio Garcia and George, because apparently Elio has been repping House Dane for like 15, 20 years at this point.
Longer than us. Longer than us.
Elio,
we'll give it up to him.
OG Dane stan, I would say. So his question is, Ashara Dane is described as having violet eyes. Is this from a marriage to the Martells after Daeron II's sister married into that line, thus giving them Targaryen features from other Valyrian descendants? And mind telling us the Dane banner, emblem, and field, the Sword of the Morning, and his sister has caught my attention. Do you want to be George, Chloe?
Oh, I've always wanted to be. I would have to consult my notes to tell you the Dane arms. Offhand, I don't recall. As for the violet eyes, look, Elizabeth Taylor has violet eyes, and she's not of Valyrian descent that I know. Aw, George. Nor is she related to Aegon the Conqueror. Many Swedes have blue eyes, but not all those with blue eyes are Swedes, and not all Swedes have blue eyes. The same confusion exists in the Seven Kingdoms. That's a very apt thing, and I think there's something else he said about Renly, I think it was, when he mis-eyed Renly, and it was blue and green. It was green instead of blue, and everyone was like, oh, Renly Baratheon, the seed is strong. How could you forget that? And I think he responded with something, it's in a So Spake Martin, and it was like, listen, like, I don't really, the eye color isn't that important, you guys. Like, there's other things that are important in this story to pay attention to if you want bigger hints, yada, yada, about stuff. And the fact that here he really cares about the Danes' purple eyes and how different they are. Like, they're not Valyrian purple. They're just purple. To me, says volumes. Like,
yeah.
Volumes.
And then there's the second quote where he continues to hammer home the point that, like, guys, don't pay attention to the eyes. There's more important things.
Yeah, and then the other thing that he says is that if you want to figure out a family's descent, the better clue than the eyes is to look at the names. First men names tend to have simpler names, shorter names. Stark, Reed, Flint, Tallheart. The Valyrian ones are distinct. We all know what the Valyrian names are. The AE usually suggests a Valyrian in the family tree, and then Andal names are not that. So he basically says that if that makes sense, Lannister, Aaron, Tyrell, they don't fit that quick one-syllable beat for a first man name. He also says that you have to remember the inbreeding between everyone for hundreds and thousands of years, so no one is pure Andal or first man.
No, he is really being defensive about, like, they are not Valyrians. There's all these other explanations for what they could be. And if you look at the Danes, yeah, you're right. They don't follow the name structure. And their first names, none of them sound Valyrian. They sound typically Andalish, Westerosi, like Samwell. We have well, Vorian's kind of weird, but then you get Arthur, you get Ashara, you get Edric. Like, these are all typical Westerosi names. These are not high Valyrian names.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
if they are connected, it is so long ago they gave up the naming conventions in some way, which probably means that they're much older than that. And then the other weird thing that people point to for, are they Valyrians? Well, you have Dawn. Their ancestral weird meteor sword, apparently pale as milk glass. It shares a lot of similarities with Valyrian steel in terms of the sharpness. You don't need to ever have any upkeep on it. It's stronger than normal metal. You can basically just cut through armor like butter, that kind of thing. And you look at that and you look at Valyrian steel, like, well, aren't these the same? And
nope.
George has gone out of his way to say, no, Dawn is not Valyrian steel. Okay.
Me staring into the camera. George, please. Please. Please.
What is it?
Yeah, no one knows. And it's the similar feeling, right? Very same theme that it's not Valyrian specifically. And how it's passed down is super crazy, right? It's non-hereditary. Most ancestral weapons we see, like Blackfire. Aegon the Fourth giving Blackfire to Daemon. That was a big deal, right?
Big
like
problem.
that was like a huge, like, that started wars. But Dawn, they don't play that game. There's no Dragonstone so that you get to be the prince. It is, here is Dawn because you are question mark.
Sword of the morning? What does
question
that mean?
mark?
It's like sort of a meritocracy idea. It's like the most worthy gets it. I mean, we're talking about Sword in the Stone, that kind of thing. Although one thing I thought about in terms of why it might not be hereditary is that the Martells forced Dorne to become non-male primogeniture. They made it so females can also inherit. I can imagine that the male Danes were like, I'm not giving my sword to my sister. That kind of thing, because a lot of their stories about their ancient past are all warriors. They're all fighting people. They're all sacking towns. So you can see that they would not want to, their masculinity in some way would mean they would not want to make Dawn inheritable in that way. Although it also points to that this is an extremely, extremely old tradition. There's nothing else like this. Nobody else is giving out swords based on merit, except for basically Aegon the Fourth, who is a piece of shit. I don't think
but that isn't even like he has 20 kids to choose from. You know what I mean? Like, you get the sword, I guess. This
Here,
one,
Dark
roll
Sister,
a die.
whatever, man. Yeah, whatever. I got
you
too
want
many
this
swords.
one, you got this one, you got this one, you got, and I don't know. One thing that you brought up here, though, with that primogeniture coming to Starfall, it turns out there are other places that seem to practice that, though, right? Like in the marches, in the north, in the neck, the reeds, Mira is the heir. Just interesting. Very interesting how that's practiced in other places of Westeros. Very rarely, but where it is might be important.
I feel like you're referencing something. It's right there.
I just can't.
I don't know. We'll get back. It's gone like a star. Like a meteor,
a falling star.
A falling star. And this sort of brings up the question, like, okay, so how do you get Dawn? Is it like do they shove it back into the meteor and then you have to pull it out like Excalibur? Like, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, I'm guessing it's more of a thematic pulling out of the stone, right? But it's very much the point George is making with those Arthurian beats behind House Dayne. It brings in that whole Sword of the Evening Dark Dane thing. He wants to be a thing, the Bat Danes, right? And yeah. I don't know, the other thing that every tinfoiler loves is that George has never said it has to be a Dane.
Just a Sword in the Morning has to rise and claim it. How do you become Sword in the Morning? Who knows? Is it a series of physical challenges? Do you have to like climb up the White Sword Tower? Do you have to beat somebody in arm wrestling? Is it like rock, paper, scissors? Well, man, you're really good at that. Sword in the Morning. Like
a Double Dare 2000.
Oh my God, would that be amazing?
Get in the nose.
All right, so now you have to swim across the Torrentine River.
Oh my God, except it's Jello. Oh. Purple Jello.
This is perfect. Oh my God. Super chat here from Sanrixian, $5. Thank you very much. Her comment is, Hashara intensifies. That's what I was thinking of. It's Hashara.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, it intensifies. I think all this is really pointing to, when you combine with their names, the weirdness of Dawn not being Valyrians but looking Valyrians. Okay, so there's some common ancestor with them and one of these many fallen great empires. Like, could be Great Empire of the Dawn, could be like something from E.T., could be something from Karth. Whatever. There's hints everywhere that there are ancient societies that were in Westeros previously that no longer. Like, you look at the High Towers and Battle Isle with their few stone fortresses. You look at Sithorios with all the weird ruins they have in the jungles. George is basically throwing it at you that there's way more civilizations that have risen and fallen than I'm telling you. So Danes are obviously connected to some of them, and there's something to do with eye color. There's something about purple eye color. Maybe some. You look at the Gemstone Emperors in particular. When you see Dany's vision of them before she hatches the dragons, she sees the Gemstone Emperors, and they all have different color eyes. There's yellow, green, purple, etc., etc. So, okay, I guess in his world, there's this idea that there's a genetic magical eyes, sure.
Yeah.
And that's what the Danes have.
Yeah, and I mean, the world of Ice and Fire is really great for that. And a lot of people think that the idea of the Great Empire of the Dawn being like, you know, Danes is far-fetched, but it makes total sense, because why the hell would he name it the Great Empire of the Dawn?
Yeah, Dawn.
You know what I mean? It's like, Dawn. Oh, wow, they have Dawn in common. That can't be a thing. There are some things in that history book to think about. Like, I always like to read those side books with the idea that since he's doing a deep dive, Fire and Blood, for example, the Kristen Cole kind of stuff back and forth, we'll never know, because that was it. Like, that was the deep dive. Now we get to speculate for fun. And we will never get an answer. Like, we're not going to get an answer on a lot of stuff that he brought up in Fire and Blood Part 1.
Nope.
And the world of Ice and Fire kind of feels like that, too. It's a lot of that sandbox play. And you see all these different families that are set up. It wouldn't surprise me if all of them have this common ancestor. By the time the First Men and the Valyrians and the Andals all start banging it out, all the genes have probably preceded it. I mean, in the world of Ice and Fire, there's the bit about how in the north, the Marsh Kings are intermixed with House Reed now, basically, is what's thought of. And there's this thing that Archmaester Aaron writes, that the Crannogmen saw their kings as the first among equals, who were often thought to be touched by the old gods, a fact that was said to show itself in the eyes of strange hues, or in speaking with animals, as the children are said to have done. So there's this like mini theory George slides in, and he's like, they could be children of the forest. Ever notice that? And you look at places like in Ib, there's the same thing, right? In Ib, they have kind of what seems like the very beginning of the children of the forest. It feels like all these common first ancestors, right? Like Hogwarts houses, right? Like Salazar Slytherin ruled the land before. That's what it feels like to me. I think everyone, and a lot of people do the blood magic stuff better than I do. I don't really go into it that much, but like, you know, like the Blackwoods banged this Stark, which means this Stark is going to be this and do this, and they can see everything forever. And I don't know about that. It's not for me, but I do know that like at this point, they've all kind of, there's blood everywhere, you know, there's genes all over the place.
The Danes have been fucking up and down Dorne for 5,000 years. So
the Danes fucked. Yes, that is.
Danes fuck. Okay. They've married everybody in the area. They're probably killing their own kin when they go into the Reach to go with the other Marcher Lords. So It happens all the time. Like, you even see it with the Starks. Like, the Grey Starks exist, which were their cadet branch that they then exterminated. So, you know, everyone marries with everybody except for the Boltons. Nobody
But there is one thing the Danes did, and that was exterminating that pussy, is what we're saying.
Making that star fall on that pussy.
Oh my god. Okay. So what is the point of all these connections that we're talking about? Please tell me, Dr. Magician.
Okay. So the point of all these connections is that as we're starting the story, as we're talking about Jon Snow and Ned and all these things, is that there's a magical and sort of ancient, maybe prophetic part to the story of why Ned came back with Jon Snow. You introduce the Danes into that to kind of throw this, what's the right word? Throw this window dressing, or let's say whatever you have going on behind you. George is doing the same thing with the Danes, where he's making sure that, you know, it wasn't just a simple, like, Romeo and Juliet situation with Rhaegar and Lyanna. There's something else going on. And with the Danes, I mean, even their origins really point that way. They aren't just a guy who won a battle or somebody that delivered a message like the Dondarrions, or even say somebody that saved a lord with their dogs and therefore that's now their sigil. Theirs is a falling star, a sword made from meteors. They built a fabulous high fantasy castle. They're former kings. Their color is purple, the color of kings. It's like that they're involved with Jon Snow is marking him as royal, magical, and special, I would say.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, if you really want to take that theory a little farther, or that, like, speculating, I mean, look at Azor Ahai, right? A bleeding star, born under That's
what they did in the show with the not-so-subtle, hey, look at Dawn covered in blood over Jon Snow being born. Wink, 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 wink,
yeah,
wink,
right?
wink.
But I mean, that is basically what we get in the book. So
yeah,
I think some of it's really cut and dry. I feel like there's an obvious, like, bold line through the books that the Danes are obviously existing to show that magic, like, is on a subtler level still there. That the prophecy, I'm pretty sure there was very much so prophecy involved for the Danes to, like, not only have possibly Ashara involved in all of the rebellion stuff. And if you guys have not read, what is it, the Harrenhal conspiracies by, is it King Littlefinger that wrote those? Am I right? Yeah. It's one of my favorite pieces. In fact, I think, if I recall, I used part of it in one of my Ashara pieces, and they said something like, oh, I don't believe that anymore. And I was like, oh, well, I really believe in you, King Littlefinger, for once. But they just have, like, a really cool out-of-the-box look of, like, the Danes were likely more involved. We're about to go into it in just a bit here. They're likely more involved than we know about. Ashara was probably at the tower, which was also confirmed by Game of Thrones, the best TV show on HBO that ever lived. It's not TV, it's HBO. Sorry. But...
Wait, do you mean Game of Thrones, the source that George adapted into books?
Yes, the source material for the series, A Song of Ice and Fire. No, there is a girl with a braid in that. Not just Wyla, there's another girl in that room if you watch very carefully when Lyanna Stark gives birth to Jon Snow. I'm just saying, there's another girl. It could be D&D or stands, they're Dane stands. And you have all this mythical stuff as the background of the forebear. Like, there's a magical sword and a magical guy with the sword that can vanquish night, right? And what is night? It's the others. That's what we're already looking at. Jon has a magical sword.
Why doesn't he have Dawn already, George? Come on, let's get on this. You know, and like you were saying with the others, they are the other, like I was saying earlier, they're the other side of the coin of the high fantasy that's being introduced into the story. They're very much doing the same purpose.
Just quietly, underground.
Just quietly.
They're B-list, right? I mean, we just talked about the Targaryens, the Martells, the Starks. Those are our A-listers. But Ashara, Dayne, Arthur, these are the shadows of the rebellion. This is the story that was happening outside of the whole, like, savior being born in a tower thing.
That's true. Before we go into... Okay, so we started with they are the mythical, amazing, wow, incredible Dawn Age heroes of legend. Also, maybe they're the House of Azor Ahai. Why not? Sure, maybe Dawn's Lightbringer. Okay, sure. That kind of cool stuff. I thought it was a good time to pause, and we'll do a few little plugs right here. So, obviously, you're on my channel, Joe Magician YouTube channel. You can also go to Patreon, patreon.com/JoeMagician. My patrons are following along with the amazingly detailed document that me and Chloe prepared as we're going. They have access to that early. You get access to videos early, patron-only episodes. I recently did one with a Shay of History of Westeros talking about why you should watch The Expanse. You should watch The Expanse. It's really good. Another one, obviously, with your co-host, Eliana, where we talked about cripples, bastards, and broken things. That was a really good one. Get Sanrixian art, all that other kind of stuff. And also, if you're listening now and you're like, oh, I don't have like 3 hours to sit down and just watch a video of Matt and Emmett talking about Euron Greyjoy, you can go to my podcast feed. It's Wit and Wisdom of Joe Magician. It's the exact same content, just uploaded audio only. So convenient if you're driving or if you're working from home and you need to listen to something but can't have a full video up, that kind of thing. What about you, Chloe? What's going on with Girls Gone Canon?
God, what are we doing? We are covering Jaime Lannister in A Song of Ice and Fire. We are right now, we just recorded and put up Jaime 6, the big one, right? The I Dreamed of You. So that was fun episode. We're going to do Jaime 7 and A Storm of Swords next. After that, I can't tell you guys who's next after Jaime because we do point of view, how we read chapters, and it is a surprise for anyone that is not our patrons. I've heard whispers of possibly some Animal Crossing content happening from Girls Gone Canon.
Whoa. Animal Crossing content?
Yes. We're not sure if that's going to be a patron-only thing or if that's going to be... We'll see, but it will be happening probably one way or another. If it's not for everybody, it's at least for me and Eliana. And other than that, we are still covering The Subtle Knife, Philip Pullman's his Dark Materials series, second book. We will be on to Amber Spyglass next. And this month we're covering Once Upon a Time in the North, which is one of the side books by Philip Pullman about Lee Scoresby and Yorick Burnisson's kind of roots in the story. It's a fun little side book, and we're going to talk about that for patrons this month.
Guys, you should go subscribe to Girls Gone Canon. It's really good. Especially the episode, what was it, Game of Thrones, John... 8.
Oh, what was it? I don't know what chapter that is.
I don't know what chapter it was.
I've only read it every night of my life until I went to bed crying, said Matt.
That is what I say. It's unfortunate that Chloe just put out an extremely accurate portrayal of what I'm like. Me crying, thinking about Aemon. It's what I do. Anyway, that's obviously that's the one I was on with Girls Gone Canon. So listen to all the rest of them, but make sure you get that one because that one's really awesome.
It was really fun. Actually, you and Eliana helped me kind of figure out a theory I had about that rule of 3 with the tests, if you recall, for Aemon and Jon and Dany. Yeah. That was a fun episode. I liked that episode.
Even though we were all tired and you just came back from Ice and Fire Con and it was just like, we're doing this. We're going maximum Aemon this one.
And we did it, though. We did it.
We sure did. We rocked the hell out of that really short chapter. Oof. All right. So let's go back to talking about our favorite Star Boys, the Danes. The Danos. So what exactly happened to the Danes? Why are they not the kings of Torrentine anymore? Why are they just sort of medium tier nobles in Dorne and not a force in Westeros? What happened there?
So Valyrian Dayne lost his crown as King Dayne to Nymeria when she came down on him through conquest. He was sent to the wall, deposed as king, and then Nymeria and Mors Martell have a special union, and they create the ruling line of Dornish monarchs because adoption of equal primogeniture denies the Danes the throne. The son that Nymeria had, basically, doesn't work. So denies the Danes the throne. Females get the throne. Targaryens and the Marcher Lords after that from plundering the Reach. So there goes all of your money. Kind of like when Corlys went on his huge trip and came back with like all these goods. I guess
that's
the
Danes
were just kind of stealing them. Yeah, the Danes were just kind of stealing them. And the Marcher Lords also. Twice the Danes are mentioned as assaulting Old Town in the text.
Yep.
Back then. Joffrey Dayne gets defeated by Queen Visenya actually during that. So they've lost lots of their riches, right? So maybe just don't be assholes anymore, you guys. But they lost a lot of their riches from kind of, I think, well, when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or die. right? And I think they played and they lost.
They lost pretty hard. They lost really hard when Queen Nymeria showed up. I mean, obviously they fought against her. Vorian fought his war lost, was one of the many Dornish kings that was sent to the wall in their golden fetters. I think that's the line for it. After at that point, they're like, okay, well, this sucks, but we'll try and marry into Nymeria's family. We'll get our power that way since she has united Dorne. You see that a lot with Targaryens in the current timeline. Everyone's trying to get a piece of that sweet Targaryen family tree. Unfortunately, Nymeria says, nope. We are doing female inheritance. Danes get blown up. They're screwed. But it starts a long-lasting rivalry with the Martells because the Martells, it appears, let that through as law. They gave their support to that because specifically it fucked over the Danes and helped them.
Yeah, and there are totally effects of that, right? We see that they are mostly sent to court, like Ashara is sent to court in the Rebellion era to attend to Elia, but likely because Elia was, at that exact time, that was around when she had complications delivering Aegon, so I don't really think that Ashara went there to be like, hi, I'm here to be with the Martells,
Hey, how's it going? Just Ashara, having fun.
Just hanging out. No, I mean, there was a lot going on there, and she was only there for 6 months, according to the text, for like half a year. So, I mean, they don't even really try so much at court, if that makes sense. Like, they really aren't trying to be some big powerhouse anymore. It's just kind of beyond their reach. And the Marcher Lord connection you're bringing up is really interesting because the Targs ended them plundering in the Reach, but it turns out that comes against Dorne eventually, right? Because then the Marcher Lords, all the guys kind of out of the Stormlands, start coming south and plundering in the Red Mountains. Whoops. They plunder all over there. So we'll bring that up later when we talk a little more about these current Danes. But from there, the Danes are set as outcasts. They're ancient strangers, right?
Yeah, with the rise of Martells into House Nymeros Martell, the focus of Dorne economically, culturally, and politically has shifted away from Starfall and away even from the Ironwoods or Ironwoods. I always forget how to say it. It's now the Greenblood and Sunspear, and it totally just handicaps the Danes. They don't have a way in anymore. They're separated by desert. They're separated by like you just said, they're separated even by heritage because they are so weird. They're these weird, not quite Valyrians. They don't really fit in. Their names, even their naming structures aren't really fitting in with the rest of Dorne. Like, it seems like they have more Andal names than they do Dornish names. And it's also that they're probably known throughout Dorne as kind of warmongers. It's unlikely they were only going after the Stormlands and the Reach in order to amass the wealth they needed after apparently Starfall was no longer a fertile place. So they're probably stealing from everybody, going to war all the time to take hostages, sell them back, steal stuff, sell it, that kind of thing. So in the past, when it's kind of like the Targaryens, when you're powerful, that outsiderness, that strangeness setting you apart can make you almost seem godlike. It can make you seem otherworldly. But when you fall out of power, when you're now just another house, now it doesn't make you seem special. Now it makes you the other, makes you somebody else they have to deal with.
Yeah, it's hard. They're isolated, and I think that's what made them step down and not try. As we know in the rebellion, I mean, current Danes, they lost a pretty large amount of their family between 280 to 290 AC.
Yeah, that wasn't great.
That's a huge thing. If you pay attention to how the lordship falls, the dad and mom of House Dayne, well, the dad, I would say, likely was still around at that time in the rebellion. But by 297 AC, if Edric's the lord, that means that the dad, his dad, and all had to die, right? Like, they all had to die in order for him to be the guy. So you lose, what, like 3-4 members of your family, if you count Ashara, over a whole decade.
And prominent members of your family, people that were at court, your keys to power gone. And all you're left with is not that much. But if you look back this is the end of a whole strategy the Danes apparently had to hitch themselves to Targaryens. And it starts in the weirdest place you'd ever think, Maegor the Cruel. Why does Maegor the Cruel come up? Because one of the women that was suggested that he marry was Clarisse Dayne, as one of his Danes. And it's noted that the reason, beyond the high attractiveness of the Danes with their elf-like features and all that stuff, the reason that it was suggested to marry the Dane is that the Targaryens were still having problems with the Martells. They could not break their power. What they wanted to do was marry Maegor to Clarisse and then use her to start a civil war in Dorne, which would eventually knock over Nymeros Martell, which is a fascinating way of the kind of scheming the Danes were probably put themselves forward in this idea. This may have been an offer on their part, even trying to ally themselves with somebody like Maegor the Cruel in order to regain what they lost.
Well, and there's something interesting because like the next historical marriage is what, Maegor and Diana.
Yeah.
And something really interesting with that reminds me of Robert with how he married Stannis to the Florents, giving an option because if the Reach rose up, if the Tyrells rose up, what would he be able to do? Hey, you are the new Lords of the Reach, Florence. It's very smart, right? It's like having your heir, but also a little bit of a spare in case you got to quell some rebellions. So Maegor, obviously, totally not the correct political play here to think about, right? Like Maegor had some problems, maybe a few.
Kinda the Cruel.
But it makes me wonder if that's why Maegor looks at marrying Diana Dane, right? If that, if the Martells did rise up, if something happened, especially with the climate around that time, they'd have a backup.
And it's really interesting that this is the plan that was proposed to Maegor. No, Maegor, do not do what Aegon did and go down there on Valyrian and just burn them out. We have a political solution, a Crusader Kings 2 solution to try and break up Dorne. We will push the weak claims of the Danes, and we will use that to overthrow the Martells. It's a wild strategy to even try and give that to Maegor, but it really does show almost kind of how desperate they've gotten at this point, that they will consider a civil war against ostensibly their own kinsmen in the Martells and the rest of Dorne. They will subject them to Maegor the Cruel to get back what was lost. And that kind of says quite a bit about how far they have fallen. But then we go to the actual Targaryen-Dane marriage, and that is Diana Dane and Maekar Targaryen. Now, this one is interesting because when it happened, Maekar was nowhere near the throne. This is kind of a throwaway marriage, right? It's, they call Aegon the Unlikely because I think he was like 12th in line when he was born, and then literally everyone else from the spring sickness to war died in front of him until, obviously my bae, Maester Aemon, gave up the throne for him. But it shows this kind of weird interest and this attraction between the Danes and the Targaryens that continues to the current day, and this is when it kind of merged. It's also interesting to note that because of that marriage between Maekar and Diana, all of our favorite characters in the Targaryen dynasty, Danes. Danes by blood. You have Egg, you have Aemon, you have Dany, you have Rhaegar, Aerys, Rhaella. These are all relatively recent Dane cousins, which is super interesting.
And when you point this out, it really is kind of apparent. Like, there are no prominent, since Nymeria, there are really no prominent Martell-Dane marriages that are written in the text at all. They intermarry more into the Targaryens, so it makes you wonder where those loyalties lie, right? Like, especially when you get Rhaegar and Arthur growing up together, being best friends. To me, it just is interesting. Like, when Ashara is sent to court to tend to Elia, what was the reason? Was it to get more power with the Targaryens? Probably, especially when we know that, well, speculative, but Rhaegar was planning to do something about his dad finally.
Could also be almost a Renly Marjorie situation. Maybe they were tired of Rhaella. Maybe they wanted to replace her as Aerys' wife and then get the Danes on the throne that way. Because Ashara is beautiful and charming and lovely. She looks Valyrian, and that's actually something Aerys was looking for Rhaegar's bride. He settled with Elia Martell But his initial choice was he wanted to get somebody from Essos. He wanted Rhaegar to marry the blood of old Valyria. And when that wasn't available, maybe the Danes are the closest thing to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That'd be a terrible marriage. Oh my God.
Oh my God. I'm very glad that didn't happen.
Would it be, well...
No, it's not. We're not making a name for it. No, we're not doing it. Okay, we're not giving them a celebrity couple name. It's not happening, man.
It's out of here.
Get it out of here. Red flag.
It's done. But this was also spawned a million theories about the connections between the Targaryens and the Danes. Like, there's theories that, it's the Dane blood that allowed the dragons to come back and make them hatch. It's like, okay, well, obviously it didn't work for Egg and Aerys. Why did it work for Dany? It's probably not that, but the magical mixing of blood is definitely an idea that George likes playing up, and his readers are latching onto and making a million terrible bad theories about it.
Well, we're going to talk about those theories definitely towards the end of this episode, because I think we can find a common ground with your bad theories.
I love my bad theories.
I know you do.
But let's talk about maybe the biggest relationship between the Targaryens and the Danes, and that's in the current times. Well, sort of. We have Rhaegar Targaryen and his second or third cousin, Arthur Dayne. Rhaegar is extraordinarily closed off as a person. He does not have a lot of friends. He does not have a lot of close friends, and he barely tells anybody what he's thinking. Like, even people like Jon Connington and Barristan, who spent tons of time with Rhaegar, really have no idea that he was this far into the world of magic and prophecy and the idea that the apocalypse was coming. But his best friend is Arthur Dayne. So you have to wonder, is this information that he trusted with Arthur? And is it specifically because the Danes come from this kind of background, the high fantasy background we were talking about, with going back to the dawn of days? Maybe they have secret histories that nobody knows about. Maybe they have records of the last long night. It's something. And we have a quote here from Barristan where he says, even Rhaegar, the Prince of Dragonstone, had never trusted him as he had trusted Arthur Dayne. Harrenhal was proof of that. Now, what we know that Arthur did at Harrenhal, basically the only thing he did is he lost to Rhaegar in the joust. That's kind of it.
Yeah. Well, but as we see, like, pre-planning that in Attorney, I mean, look at what Gregor and Loras, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Another little Loras / Tyrell bit coming in here. That not only that, I think that shows, like, Barristan is on the Kingsguard, Arthur's on the Kingsguard, but yet the Crown Prince is sharing details with this Kingsguard member and not the rest. And the Kingsguard members, obviously, we learn, are attending Rhaegar, not Aerys in the end, right?
Well, they split.
Exactly, the last three.
Yeah. And the other quote we have here, we have Miles Mouton was Prince Rhaegar's squire, and Richard Lonmouth after him. When they won their spurs, he knighted them himself, and they remained his close companions. Young Jon Connington was dear to the prince as well, but his oldest friend was Arthur Dayne. So I think this tells us that if Arthur and Rhaegar are best friends, his oldest friends, right? And we know that Rhaegar was a bookish nerd spending all of his time in the library when he was young. I think we can probably, and since Arthur's the sort of the morning, the best fighter, we can probably trace their friendship back to those scrolls. That's probably what bound them together. It appears that Rhaegar turned to Arthur with this information, like he does with Aemon. He turns to family. Exactly. He turns to his blood, and he becomes a peerless warrior. He becomes a lot better. Well, that also means Arthur was already at court, basically.
Yeah, and Arthur is supposed to be young, right? Like, before Jaime, Arthur was the young Kingsguard guy, right? That had been, like, when he was knighted as a Kingsguard member. I mean, he was the youngest before. So, they had to have grown up together. They had to be at court together. I'm seeing a montage where Arthur trains Rhaegar on how to be a knight, right? Like, this is how you do it, Rhaegar. This is how you're going to use your sword. But it's more than that. I want to bring it back to what you said about Aemon, because the only two people that Rhaegar trusts, like, implicitly that we know, are Aemon and Arthur. So it's very strong because he talked to Aemon more than likely, 100%, 120% likely about these scrolls. Yes. I mean, we know it. So those are the two people he talked to about his scrolls. And with all the mystery that surrounds everything for House Dayne, I think it's apparent Arthur had to be in on that.
Had to be 100%.
Had to be.
I mean, it all just fits together so nicely. It's exactly like how you would write it if you wanted to disguise it. Well, Rhaegar became a really good warrior at this after he discovered these scrolls, and all of a sudden his best friend is the best warrior in the kingdom. Okay, got it, nailed it.
Yep, nailed it.
Arthur is read into the idea of the prince that was promised, that Rhaegar is trying to rehatch dragons or bring about or he thinks the others are coming, which also makes sense when you hear Arthur's last words where he says about I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. Well, Arthur probably knows the wars that are about to come, and it's not
not the rebellion. We're not talking about the rebellion.
5 Kings. He's talking about the return of the War for the Dawn, most likely.
It does feel like Rhaegar is finally the Targaryen to get these goddamn scrolls right. You know what I mean? Like, he's the first one that's read them and been like, Amen, Arthur, does this mean what I think it means?
Perfect, Rhaegar.
Yeah, thank you. That's his voice. And then he like puts his little skinny chest all out like, I must be the prince that was promised. But all of them keep going through time, acting on some sort of prophecy. And yet here's Rhaegar, who was finally kind of assembling the right people that could possibly deal with that prophecy.
And when we look at when Arthur would have had to join the Kingsguard, it's likely it would have been probably during Jaehaerys' second reign. There was a really good comment about this on Reddit. I lost the link, unfortunately, but they make the point that after Summerhall, the Targaryen family is super depleted. So many of them have died, and all you have left is Aerys, Rhaella, Jaehaerys, and baby Rhaegar. So it makes sense that Jaehaerys II may have tapped his family, his extended family in the Danes, especially knowing that Jaehaerys is also very much interested in the higher mysteries, to bring them to court and restart the relationship between the Danes and the Targaryens. I think that makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, we hear about the Martells going on their victory tour to marry Elia off to someone, right? And we get that whole monologue of first they started and they went to the Danes first. And we actually hear that they went to Starfall. I want to say that was 280, maybe it was 274. I'd have to look at my notes. But they did a tour de France, basically. Went to Starfall. We're all like, should we marry our kids to you? And then moved on. They went to Hightower after that, yada, yada. But I'm sure they held out. I'm sure both sides held out. If you look at how Martells kind of operate, making sure before they make their move. But they were holding out for Rhaegar, obviously, and the Danes probably also holding out.
It is kind of weird that Rhaegar did not marry Ashara. It seems like that's the relationship that should have happened, right? I mean, the age difference is still weird, but obviously Rhaegar doesn't have a problem marrying women much younger than him, apparently. That's how it goes with him. He's best friends with Arthur. They're trying to restart the connections between the Danes and the Targaryens. It's a real question why Ashara, not Elia. I mean, why Elia, not Ashara, got that marriage.
Well, and I'm sure that is because Aerys wanted to cement the realm. And I'm sure that the Martells aren't going to look down on a little extra power, which we learned went not really well, obviously. There's a little more in that theory from King Littlefinger about the Harrenhal conspiracies, about the way that the tourney in general is framed as this big political experience for all of this. And obviously it happens after the marriages have already happened, but looking at the marriages for like Elia and Rhaegar and looking between it and how it happened, and then looking at Harrenhal and how it's set up, I mean, the tourney at Harrenhal completely plays like a huge political thing, more than the tourney of the hand ever was.
It's a really weird situation. I believe in the text it's mentioned that it was supposed to be a great council, but then Aerys showed up and crashed the party.
Yeah.
And then you look at who is guarding the Tower of Joy, which we'll get to obviously in a little bit. You have Gerald Hightower, you have Oswell Went, who somebody here has added something to our notes that they want to say Kettle Black.
Who said that?
Oswell Kettle Black? What is this? Some crazy theory about the Wents?
In the words of Littlefinger, look closer.
Yes, and then of course Arthur Dayne. So if you're thinking about that in terms of who's Rhaegar's supporters at this would be, well, he has the support of the Hightowers and the Faith of the Seven. Okay, so he also has the support of the Danes, which means he has Dorne. Also has the support of the Wents, which means maybe usurping the Tullys, bringing back Harrenhal in terms of power. Maybe that was the price the Wents put on it, because they put out a massive amount of money for this tournament. If you're investing in the prince, you're probably looking to get something out of it, you know?
But wasn't it bankrolled by an anonymous person, though, also?
That too.
Yeah. From I think the World Book tells us that it was bankrolled by an anonymous person, and I think it's been super speculated it was Tywin. That Tywin was half throwing in his bet, obviously with Rhaegar, but then he waited to play it out. But it is not too long after 276 with Duskendale, or 277, whichever it was.
That's true, and at that point, Cersei's unmarried, and she's obsessed with Rhaegar. Maybe Tywin said, all right, I hate Aerys. Rhaegar's the better king. Okay. And then, but then the really interesting thing that happens at the Tourney of Harrenhal is actually Ashara. She's probably one of the headlines of what's going on at the Tourney of Harrenhal. Chloe, why don't you tell us all about Ashara?
Yes. In the tourney, she is seen through a nice little, one of my favorite chapters, actually, Storm of Swords, Brand 2. She's seen dancing in this story that Mira Reed tells, with Arthur Dayne, Oberyn, Jon Connington, and Eddard. And to be fair, it's a white sword. The language is referring to sigils, right? It's the maid with the laughing eyes dancing with a white sword, a red snake, the Lord of the Griffins, and lastly with the quiet wolf. And King Littlefinger puts forth this theory in the Harrenhal conspiracies that every person Ashara is dancing with, not counting Ned, obviously, because that was purely out of, pubescent love and lust for Ned to get in there.
That my son.
He's like, my nerd dreams are coming true.
Oh my god, my magic pixie dream girl, Ashara.
That is actually what she's written as.
Yeah.
Anyways, but the idea that Ashara is dancing with each of these separate factions to see, like, hey, you in on this? You in on supporting Rhaegar? Let's chat. Let's dance. Her dancing with Oberyn. Her dancing with Jon Con. Basically dancing with all these guys and trying to chit-chat with them.
It certainly would be a subtle way of trying to figure it out. Because as we've seen, at least in the Dunk and Egg novellas, these kind of tourney intrigues, they really try hard to disguise them, and they try to make sure that the spy master isn't figuring out. Because as we know, Varys showed up with Aerys. So Aerys shows up with Varys. God, that is also a tongue twister. At that point, you have to step extra quick to make sure you're not getting caught. And I am sure it wasn't just Howland watching the maid with the laughing purple eyes. I'm sure Aerys' loyalists were watching everything that Rhaegar's friends were doing.
Oh yeah. And Aerys already automatically gets support, right? He gets it automatically from the different houses that are sworn to him. But having like Harrenhal support him, having Tywin maybe whispering in Rhaegar's ear, those are really powerful alliances that Aerys has barely been holding on to.
Yeah, definitely. The Tywin relationship is over. A lot of his lords are already saying, like, boy, we really don't want Aerys as king anymore. Rhaegar seems great. It's interesting that she danced with the red snake. So she danced with Oberyn. So the Danes, who historically have a rivalry with the Martells, are trying to find if this is true, they're negotiating even with the Martells. That's how serious this has gotten, that they are putting aside their blood feud.
And that does say something, like they're not just, and I think the family has, like we've been saying, obviously changed from what they were 100 to 200 years ago, even, especially with Aerys' reign kind of coming down and being so tyrannical in the end. I'm sure they see this, and I'm sure they know it, and I'm sure that it's in everybody's best interest to get Elia and her children out of there.
Yes. That may have been the price, because as we know, Lewin Martell was also a member of the Kingsguard. So another little subtle competition between the Martells and the Danes and the Targaryen court. Also, I just want to point out here, Barristan, like, knock it off, bro.
Yeah, so that white sword could have been Barristan that danced with her, but also I'm glad with it being Arthur. I'm fine with that. And also, like, it's just like a friendly reminder that Barristan was 45 and Ashara was like a teenager at this time.
Oh my
god. I can't believe you danced with this guy and he's not me.
Get over it, Barristan. Knock it off. Stop hitting on the young future
Yeah, let her live.
Smear on a rock.
Let her live.
Nobody can let Ashara live. And then it's also really interesting thinking about in terms of the families that are supporting Rhaegar and Arthur, and then what were their motivations were when they ended up at the Tower of Joy. So we know a lot about characters like Gerald Hightower, where he's the sort of guy that stands outside Aerys's bedchambers and listens to him assaulting his wife Rhaella, and he says, "Hey man, you're a Kingsguard. You have to protect. You're sworn to protect him, but not and her, but not from him." That kind of thing, where he's like, your duty comes above all else. So how do you get that guy, the guy that is willing to listen to sexual assault and be like, this is normal, to turn on Aerys?
And follow you
to Dorne to guard your second wife, which, by the way, is a huge problem with the Faith of the Seven. Like, the idea of a Targaryen having two wives, they're not going to be psyched about that. They have started wars over that before.
Yeah.
Not okay. The Wents seem to just be kind of trying to push the Harrenhal Riverlander thing. Okay, that happens all the time.
The Wents are like, I'm just hoping to hang on to this castle for a few more years and break the last record, you know?
Yeah, I mean, everyone loses Harrenhal eventually, and so do the Wents. Bummer. During the War of the Five Kings, they end up losing. But the Arthur connection, I think, is by far the most interesting because there is politics there. But as we were talking about, I don't even think the Danes are in this to marry Rhaegar or even to usurp the Martells, because if they're negotiating with the Martells, then they're not splitting it. So that tells you why Arthur and why Ashara are there is probably the magical, prophetic, higher fantasy reasons and loyalty to Rhaegar in particular.
No, that's a great point, because Ashara has, like, other than this romance we hear of her dancing with these men, there are no big marriage prospects that are put forth for her, right? Like, she's not off being betrothed. Maybe that was her role in going to court, was to find that, but she is, and this is obviously also considering that Edric Dayne is born, you know, in the next little bit of time. He's born, in 287, 288, something around there. And so obviously he becomes the heir to the eldest Dane brother, who is a silent figure, a nameless figure in all this that we'll talk about in a bit. But that's the future. The Danes aren't concerned with Ashara pumping out some babies. They're not concerned with Illyria, who's later born, pumping out babies. There's no political movement here. That's what I find interesting. There's no, they don't, it's like they're not trying, though. It's, I mean, Ned wakes up one day and accidentally steps wrong and his daughter has to marry a prince. But, like, the Danes aren't trying.
They're not scheming, which is weird because everything about them says they should, which I think, again, points to the fact that the Dawn of Days, the holders of Dawn itself, are thinking much longer term than just themselves. I mean, even Arthur Dayne, there's nothing that says the Sword of the Morning has to be a Kingsguard. Previous Swords of the Mornings have married Nymeria. Previous ones have been kings. Arthur, they throw away Arthur as a potential marriage pact. They throw away their most impressive son to the Kingsguard. Nobody does that. Imagine Brandon Stark. You go to him and you say, listen, Brandon, I know you're the Wild Wolf. I know you like screwing around. I know you like your weird scheming stuff, but join the Kingsguard. And he would laugh in your face. Arthur Dayne does, though. He joins the Kingsguard because the Danes, I think, are more about duty and service, which is probably why they got along with Ned.
Yeah, I think and I know you've brought up kind of the idea of, like, who were they loyal to? We don't know. But I think they were more concerned with the overarching picture and the common good. And, I mean, they already had their heir, right? And technically you have the heir, then you have the spare. Arthur's the spare here. Joining the Kingsguard is a super honorable thing, especially for houses with old, strong blood, which the Danes do have. They might not be as sparkling in front page as a lot of these houses are. They might not be the Lannisters. They might not be, you know, wardens of anything of the South or anything, but they still have very strong old ancient blood. And the fact that they keep loyal to sending their star jock son with a trophy, all the trophies on the wall, out there and say, hey, you're fine, you go be a Kingsguard. That is saying something. That is important to say. Like, they're not looking for that. They're looking to do something more in this story than just get to the top.
Yeah, they are not Tywin Lannister. There's very different goals for Starfall. And then, of course, we get to the pinnacle of the drama with the Danes and the Targaryens in the story so far. We get the Tower of Joy, where Ned shows up with it's 7 against 3, I think that's it. And it's Arthur Dayne, it's Gerald Hightower, it's Oswald Went against Ned and his boys. And before we get to like the actual fight and all the weird cryptic things Arthur says, how did Ned find the Tower of Joy, Chloe? How did he do it?
He must have just gotten really lucky. Really lucky.
He found that one guard post in the Red Mountains that nobody else could apparently find.
Yeah, apparently, since no one in the story knows much about the Red Mountains except for like Ned, Howland, and Mira. Suddenly,
wait, we know somebody from the Red Mountains, don't we?
Was it Ashara? Is that what you want to know?
Yeah.
You think it could be Ashara Dayne that told Ned? Yeah, I think that's a given. I think the fact that there's so much back and forth of like Ned took this mysterious woman with him, the fisherman's was it daughter or wife? I don't know why I never remember.
I think
daughter. It's probably because of Dornishman's wife. I always just like sing it in my head, and then I don't know. But I've tasted the fisherman's daughter. So the fish. Anyways, the fisherman's daughter, like that story cropping up in Dance just very vaguely and quietly. And like, oh, could it be Ashara? A lot of people think it could be Ashara that Ned like went off with. But I have this vision in my head totally of like Ashara and Ned docking at the sisters and like her with a hood over her head, like trying to raise people for the rebellion or do things to go like on a covert mission to get Lyanna even. It's not out of the picture. Like I added in my timeline of could this be Ashara? It could be. It doesn't have to mean more than that. But I definitely think she had to have told him somehow because George has said in a couple different times in interviews, Ashara wasn't bolted down during the rebellion. He's going to reveal that. Yeah, that she was not bolted down and all will be revealed eventually, quote unquote. I'm suffering. Please, George.
Please, George, give us
please.
The thing I find really interesting, so Ashara probably led Ned there, but doesn't that work against them? Like, Arthur's there guarding Lyanna. Ashara is showing Ned to the Tower of Joy, which means she's setting up her brother and maybe her lover to die? Like, what's going on here? Or does this, again, go back to the idea of prophecy and magic that maybe they were just sort of following some kind of, like, prophetic script? Where Ashara knew she had to bring them down there, or maybe she had problems with Arthur. I'm not really sure what it is, but it's weird that the Danes, who previously seem totally in line, in this one circumstance, completely clash with each other.
Well, the weirder thing about that, too, is, like, I guess it's that self-sacrifice theme, right? Like, that self-sacrifice and true love are the most magical things in the whole world, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of storytelling. I'm sure there's something like that about it, but it does beg that she knew there would be a showdown. Like, there's something we've all been analyzing about this damn scene in Fever Dream for so long, because the Fever Dream's not exact, right? Like, we know that Ned is totally drugged out and, like, he's dreaming, like, oh, and then there's a ghost, and the ghost did this, and it kind of looked like Arthur Dayne with bigger biceps. No, I'm just kidding. But we always know there's a missing ingredient. Right? Like something is missing from the knowledge of this scene. We are just missing like 2 sentences that would probably explain the whole thing. But it makes me feel like it was predetermined. And I think there's a lot of strong theme work in that with a lot of very, very silly theories we've heard about before. Very silly. I know you might have been a proponent of these silly theories before.
I love silly Dane theories. Are my favorite. I write them all the time. Well, I used to.
So tell me about this theory about Corin and Arthur.
Oh boy. So
I know it very well, but I just want you to tell me because I like it when you tell me stuff.
Okay. Well, I'll do this for you, Chloe. Oh, hang on. We have a super chat showing up. User, let's see here, 3-eyed monkey. And I can't. Why can't I see all of it? Okay, there we go. Super chat for... Oh, it's in pounds. Excellent. Are you familiar with the theory AD had no impact on the plot because his purpose in the story is to symbolically explain the main theme of A Song of Ice and Fire? So talking about Arthur Dayne, it could be. I mean, that's what we were talking about. That's like the whole introduction to the stream. We're talking that they are, in a way, symbolically and legendarily adding kind of backstory to this. They are draping it in decoration of high fantasy, and that could be true. Why it seems like we'll never know what happened to Arthur, because everyone knows Arthur's now dead, basically, except for Jaime. It could just be that, but it also definitely seems like George has plans for, like you were saying, at least revealing Ashara's role. And if you reveal Ashara's role, then you're probably revealing Arthur's too, I would say.
Yeah, and you've written about a lot of awesome 5-year gap stuff right before. I'm always impressed about that. But the 5-year gap being removed, obviously, is our biggest issue here, right? It's harder to do a Dane reveal when you don't really have any living Danes that are old enough to do crap, right? Like,
other than Darkstar and Edric, and we know Edric knows the wrong story.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some sort of weird confusion there. And so there's this big idea that people had, big tinfoil theory. Oh, yeah.
Wait, I got this one.
You got this? I thought you were going to tell me, but I was going to do it for you.
I'm sorry, I got interrupted by the super chat. Shit happens. So the main problem with the story that Ned tells and everything that goes on at the Tower of Joy is Edric, otherwise known as Ned Dayne. So you go to the Tower of Joy. The story is that Ned kills Arthur, takes Dawn, and then goes to Starfall. Then he does something to Ashara Dayne, and according to the official story, she jumps out of a tower and dies on the rocks. All Ned has done is essentially say, I killed your favorite son. Your favorite daughter's now dead because of me, but I gave you a sword. And the Danes are like, you know what? I like you, Ned Stark. You're a good dude. And then they name and nickname, well, they almost name, but they nickname the heir to the house after Ned Stark. So the problem there is, well, there's a mismatch in terms of action and reaction. So obviously some of the actions we know were different or didn't happen. And you've obviously gone on immensely about Ashara and how Ashara is the one that did not die, but the other one is possible too, that Arthur Dayne did not die in the Tower of Joy, that he survived and was like living almost as like an Obi-Wan Kenobi figure out in the desert in some cave somewhere. And the theory is, because Mance Rayder, these are actually usually two link theories. Mance Rayder is so similar in terms of his characterization to Rhaegar, and one of his best friends is Qhorin Halfhand. People have wondered, well, if Mance is Rhaegar, maybe Qhorin is actually Arthur, and they join the Night's Watch together in secret. Go.
Yes. So I can't make fun of you for this because I was an Arthur truther for a while. Mm-hmm. On top of being a Ashara truther. I've decided that over time it's molded into like, no, it's not possible. And yes, it's silly. We talked a lot about this on Girls Gone Canon, but it's not that silly when you look at it only for its thematics.
Yes.
Dawn and Qhorin Halfhand arrived together. The black stones had turned to gray and the eastern sky had gone indigo when Stone Snake spied the rangers below wending their way upward. So yes, the thematic resonance, that's really strong there. If you look at the idea of Jon having to kill Qhorin Halfhand, who has said many things before to him, like, and let's look back for a second in Clash of Kings, Jon 5. Why does Qhorin sound so grave after such a victory? Compare that with Jaime's fever dream in A Storm of Swords 6. We all swore oaths, said Sir Arthur Dayne, so sadly. And flashback to Jon 5, Qhorin once more. We can only die. Why else do we don these black cloaks but to die in defense of the realm? Mm-hmm. And up in A Storm of Swords, Jon 5. Fight with them, Qhorin had said before he surrendered his own life to Longclaw, but it had not come to that till now. Once I shed a brother's blood, I am lost. I crossed the wall for good then, and there's no crossing back. Arthur Dayne is the Corran half-hand in the way that Ned is to Arthur and Jon is to Corran. Corran is Jon's Arthur Dayne. Mm-hmm. Look at Eddard's fever dream in Ned 10. Their faces burned clear. Even now, Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, had a sad smile on his lips. And then again in Bran 3, A Clash of Kings. The finest knight I ever saw was Arthur Dayne, who fought with a blade called Dawn, forged from the heart of a fallen star. They called him the Sword of the Morning, and he would have killed me but for Howland Reed. So we don't know what happened, but something happened to where I think it was probably known, like you said, that Arthur might not make it out of this. If they are regarding Jon as their future king, right? If Rhaegar knows, I'm not going to make it out of this, something about the prophecy, something Ghost of Highheart, because very obviously that says the whole
something Ghost of Highheart.
Something Ghost of Highheart. Rhaegar obviously rode through the Riverlands with Lyanna, with Arthur, with that band of merry men, right? They more than likely would have stopped and checked out, and probably he would have sang that song that he 110% wrote, Jenny's song for her, Let's Be Real.
Yeah.
And Arthur died for Jon, for Lyanna's baby, for keeping the secret. So something happened in there that made it okay for Howland and Ned to have, let Arthur die. He likely died the same way as Corran, knowing he had to do anything and everything for his cause.
It's true. And there's a really good comment here in the chat. Laura7Ann says, or the prophecy stated that in order for Jon to be born under a bleeding star, Arthur had to die, and he knew that. They've been sharing ideas about the prophecy since kids. He's sad because he knows his fate. And that's also very much what's implied with Rhaegar. His melancholy, his sadness, it's implied that he knows that he will not be Azor Ahai himself. He will not be the prince that was promised. The dragon needs 3 heads. Well, that doesn't mean him. He's obviously talking about his kids. He knows that he will be dying, and the next generation will. It actually, Aemon says this outright, where he says that basically, Rhaegar initially thought it was him, and he got convinced and said it would be his children. So much the same, Arthur and Rhaegar are not thinking about just this generation themselves. They are thinking the next one, when the others will come back, probably.
It's interesting you say that, Matt, and I'm trying to find something for you, but there's a certain quote that I want to bring up right now that really reminds me of what you just said. If you recall, there are certain children that are currently the guardians to another prince.
Oh.
A certain prince, and one of them knows that he's doomed to die.
Is this like some sort of alligator person?
Yes, it's a lizard person.
It's a lizard lion person.
Yeah, it's a very strong parallel. This is I like to bring up often that Arthur and Ashara and Mira knowing that Jojen's going to die, protecting Bran. It's not the very first time someone would go off to protect a prince and die.
Yeah, and Jojen seems exactly right on the money with his prophetic visions. I mean, people have wondered for a while if Rhaegar had them. Dragon dreams, that sort of thing. It's a thing in his family. Could be the same idea behind Jojen, where obviously he teaches Bran how to use his powers. He has them too. The idea of these sort of magical people giving themselves up for service for the greater goal is, like you said, very much in line thematically with what these magical figures tend to do. Even Bloodraven, like he has basically given up his life in service of the greater goal, being essentially becoming a tree at this point.
A very good tree.
Yeah. Jojen paste. Oh, okay. So if we're talking about Jojen paste, is there Arthur paste? No?
I'm not going to respond to that or dignify it with a response. I'm not going to do that.
Apparently that is a step too far. Cannibalism of the Danes.
Cannibalism of the Danes. Leave them alone.
leave the sad boys alone. But yeah, I think that's an excellent point. The idea that the Danes have higher purpose, that they see the world differently, perfectly lines up with their characterization, their history, their interactions with the guy who believes this the most in the current story in Rhaegar. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I guess that's a good time to talk about it, that obviously you've made some jokes about it already, and a lot of people in the chat know, but I am a huge, huge believer. The one thing the one thing that I'm like, I'm betting my lifeblood on it. If it's not true, it's over for me. I'm throwing myself out of the marble towers at Starfall. Like, I am going to be in the summer sea dead if this is not true. But I have a huge Howland, much like that was the point. Good job, Matt. I am a huge Howland and Ashara truther. And it used to be silly. Like, it started off and I was like, ooh, Arthur's still alive, Ashara's still alive. But it all kind of lines up, like, eerily well, especially if you chase the timeline of where Howland was, where Ashara was in the rebellion, and the idea that, like, House Dayne, even, like, supporting Rhaegar during all this, and even supporting, possibly helping Ned, that's, like, a treasonous offense, right?
Very much.
And so, yes, Arthur's Kingsguard, I mean, Robert obviously is forgiving. He lets people, get on their knees and apologize. And he's like, here's my hand. Let's get drunk. Isn't that what happened, like, with Grandison and all of them?
Yeah.
Same thing. Here's some beer. But yeah, he probably would have taken Arthur back. But Arthur supporting Rhaegar in this huge rebellion that House Dayne obviously has some sort of role in, of, like, supporting against the father, against Aerys, and then, like, the Danes also being like, hey, the Starks are good guys, and obviously they're kind of involved in this because Lyanna's pregnant. So we obviously have to support them too. If Rhaegar loses and Robert gets on the throne, what happens to House Dayne?
Yeah, that's kind of a problem. That's a big problem. Like we were saying, how their plotting seems to be going nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. And I really do think that that gives kind of an opportunity for us to play around with Howland. So the show did it straight and dry, stab in the back, whatever. Howland used guerrilla warfare and just got in there and just stab. Guerrilla warfare, which is funny because the Dornish and the Crannogs have a lot of text about them using similar war tactics,
very much
and having very similar bodies and styles. I digress. But there are so many... There's so many things that point to it. There's totally space for Howland to have been able to, I don't know, maybe negotiate, maybe do a quick high five. Mm-hmm. Something had to have happened. And to have everyone's like, well, that's weird. Why would she marry her brother's killer? Ned giving her kind of a marriage with Howland is actually really great to start a new life. There's a lot of different things as far as etymology, like Gianna Reed being casually John and Lyanna Reed in one name.
Mm-hmm. Weird how that happens.
Yeah, just scrolling past that must be a coincidence. I know that everyone's like, not everyone has to be someone. And no, they don't, but they are, like, in every page of this story. There's obvious hidden identities, right? There's Alaris. Okay, we know it's Sorella. There's Arston Whitebeard being Barristan. There's Sandor as the Gravedigger. There's Gregor being Sir Robert Strong.
How strong?
Settle down, Matt.
How strong?
There's a next level stuff of, like, kind of medium secret identities, right? Not hard, but Peyton the Alchemist, or Young Griff as Aegon, or Blood Raven as Maynard Plum, if you want to go back to Dunk and Egg. Mm-hmm. And then there are even some hints, like we talked about, possibly the Kettleblacks. Do a little research, but if you read Jaime's chapters with the Kettleblacks there at court, and then you read, like, Sansa's chapters going to the Vale with Littlefinger, makes you think there's something at play there. Makes you think something. Doesn't hurt that Sansa's related to the Wentz, right? Doesn't hurt.
Yeah, they don't call her a bat or anything, just because she's half or part went through.
Quarter Minissa.
Whatever.
Yeah, and then let's look at the rebellion characters that are emerging. Lem Lemoncloak.
Weird.
I'm sorry, that one is like 150%. It has to be Richard Lonmouth.
That's Richard Lonmouth. It is him.
So what is so confusing about the idea that maybe there are these people that were on the wrong side of the rebellion who refuse to support the current regime after what happened and are in hiding? I mean, there are. We just read about them, right? And what makes them, like, us think that they're probably hard to believe is one thing, but is this because George wants us to think this way? Are we seeing what he wants us to see? So if Ashara being alive is not that far-fetched, especially when, in a pretty much canon source on the app, George has said her body was never found.
Who's the app made by? Oh, that's right.
Yes.
OG Dane stan, Elio Garcia.
He would never lie to me about this, guys.
No.
God, no one would. If they are Geodonian, right, with a little bit of that Hightower lineage, the Danes, it sets a stage for a lot of interesting historical parallels, like what we've talked about, right? The Crannogmans having strange-hued eyes, and the First Men and the Great Empire of the Dawn having the strange-hued eyes. We get the idea of eyes in general very strongly in Jojen's plot. We learn he had graywater fever and that he has very mossy, strange green eyes. We don't hear about Mira's eyes, but that's interesting to me. I thought that was interesting. And then we get something with a look of perspective on Ashara's eyes in the story. Ashara is described as having haunting violet eyes by approximately, I want to say it's 4 of the mentions out of 9. 9 or 10 mentions of her in the entire series straight from the books by name. There are like 4 mentions of her having haunting eyes, but there's only 1 mention of her having laughing eyes. And that was during Mira's story about the girl that she was at court. Every single person that mentions Ashara's eye color and her having haunting eyes feels guilt about her. Barristan, Cersei, Catelyn. Every single one of them is guilty about Ashara, right? I thought that was just something really interesting that they are the only people that describe it that way. And then we kind of have touched on Barristan very jokingly, but he does think, quarter joke, I said what I said. In A Dance with Dragons in The Discarded Knight, Barristan has this thought process about Quentyn and Daenerys and Hizdahr. He says, like all good queens, she put her people first, else she would never have wed Hizdahr zo Loraq. But the girl in her still yearned for poetry, passion, and laughter. She wants fire, and Dorne sent her mud. You can make a poultice out of mud to cool a fever. You can plant seeds in mud and grow a crop to feed your children. Mud would nourish you, where fire would only consume you. But fools and children and young girls would choose fire every time. A big generalization on every single girl in the world, apparently. But okay, he knows a lot of them. But like, Barristan thinks that about Daenerys. We all know that's a very simple view of what Daenerys is going through, right? Like, she has Dorne on her door, like, let's make an alliance that could make or break you taking the throne ever. And then she has Meereen on her other side going, hey, you have to do your job here, lady, so how about you marry our guy? God, I mean, I'm sure Daenerys would love mud, man. She'd love to just lay down and have a nap. She's busy. She's out there. But he thinking this way kind of parallels and lines up with how he might think about Ashara, which, when you look at Howland is mud, literally.
Yeah.
That's literally mud. Mudman, yes. Those Manson, Rhaegar, Rhaegar, Arthur parallels are obviously very strong, deliberately sacrificing someone so that you can have a second life, which... Okay, reborn, Dane, falling star, boom, yep. Okay. And then you get to some of the more finite plots, like Mira telling Bran, we don't have a maester. We don't have men-at-arms to train us in Greywater Watch. No maesters, you'd have to send to the Citadel for one, to get one, and then see Maester Wallace, who did all of the dirty work in Southern Ambitions, right? Helped tear apart tons of people's lives, just so that the North could maybe, pair up with the Riverlands, with the yada, yada, yada. So all these ideas of people marrying together and having maesters, most of the time the maesters are the Grey Rats. Just ask Barbary, right? Barbary Riswell knows.
Babs Riswell.
Babs. Yeah, George had said in this So Spake Martin in 2002 in an interview about how he plays his biggest reveals. And he says, you can ask, but don't count on answers. I like to keep my hand hidden till it's time to play my cards.
His wild cards. So
that's from August in 2002. And it is how George plays this, right? Like, we do not know R plus L equals J. Nope. 100%. I mean, if you read the books, you should. But we don't know.
I mean, if you 100%. Can read, yeah.
Not many can. So that's a lot. There are audiobooks, damn it. We don't have like hard reveals on these things, but the only way any of this would be revealed would be at the end, right? Revealing the Danes in The Winds of Winter, what are you going to do? All of a sudden, George is going to say, and this was the secret about the Danes all along. No, it's not coming to us till A Dream of Spring.
It is Ashara Dayne. I am still alive. Hello, audience.
Yeah. And if we did get the reveal, and it's all for fun, but if we did get the reveal, I think I've always had this great image in my head. I think I talked about it on Nauticast, but of Jon going down to Greywater Watch to talk to Howland about his parents. Well, Howland doesn't know much about Rhaegar, but Ashara probably would.
Mm-hmm. Probably knows quite a lot. And this is one thing I was thinking about as I think about Ashara, and as we've been going through the stream, is we're really emphasizing the idea that the Danes and probably Ashara and Arthur are read into this stuff, that they have values that are very, very similar to what we know from Howland. We know he went to the Isle of Faces for a year to learn about the old gods, prophecy, all this magical stuff, and shows up at Harrenhal specifically with a goal in mind. We're not... Jojen and Mira do not tell us exactly what that goal is, but he's there doing something. And it's something that doesn't seem to make sense. Wow, shades of Arthur and Ashara. It's also,
You're welcome.
It's also that, much like Rhaegar, Ashara probably does have this other side to her that nobody knows. Like, much in the same way that Barristan thinks about Rhaegar just playing his harp and like, oh, that's kind of neat. Ashara probably has this sort of second life to her, something that her and Howland can bond over, and a looking into the higher mysteries. And I think that's something that's kind of undersold when you look at the stated romance between Ned and Ashara. They don't really have that crossover. Ned doesn't think about this stuff. I mean, he thought she was cute. Maybe they did actually hook up because Barristan thinks that she got dishonored and that a Stark had to do with it. Okay, whatever that means to Barristan being dishonored, it's not really a personality match for Ashara Dayne and Ned, but definitely Howland Reed does, if you take what Jojen and Mira are like.
Yeah, and I mean, that's basically how Ashara would have grown up, right? She's around this weird mystical house with her, like, family. It's always like, we must do important things. We won't talk about them, especially not on a page of A Song of Ice and Fire, but definitely we're going to do them. It does make sense, and it wraps it up really well. I mean, that's the thing is... I think especially for Ashara, she's been put on a pedestal by every character, right? Every single character has grievances that they are unhappy with about themselves that they lay on her. Catelyn, you know, is like, I bet it was her. She's the reason we're cursed with Jon Snow, which, again, why do you think that rumor went around about Jon being Ashara's kid?
Everyone saw them probably hooking up.
I mean, look at the hair color, right? The kid came out, thank God, without silver hair. Like, thank God that Jon came out without silver hair. But if Ned had to explain that, you better hope the seed is strong from House Stark on that, you know, because shit. It just like, it's a nice way to put a ribbon on it. And you don't even need more than a paragraph to do it, right? Jon can go south and see something like Howland's pretty slender tall wife with dark violet eyes or haunting. Purple eyes, you know, like no, not haunting. They'd be laughing now, Matt. Come on.
I'm sorry.
Did you not pay attention? Get with it. No, I'm just kidding.
I was also thinking about that while you were saying that. It's amazing that the Reeds come away thinking she has laughing eyes. Well, that's the way somebody who loves her would describe her.
Well, also, like, where do you think this story of everything that happened at Harrenhal came from? It does not read like a story that your dad tells you. It reads like a story about your mom and dad falling in love.
Yeah.
Why was Howland stalking her so hard?
Yeah, that's one thing people overlook. Like, they go like, oh, Ned was trying to dance with her and Brandon went up to her. But then you read back to it and it's like Howland's eye fucking her the entire time. He is obsessed with her throughout the entire journey. Maybe there's some elements of green sight or something in maybe her purple eyes shine in the dream world or something like that. Maybe that's how he recognized her. And
I mean, it also goes without saying, look at their colors. They're bloop, right across the wheel from each other, the purple and the green, you know? I don't know. It's just interesting how they're laid against each other in history, how they're very much so described as each other with the eyes and, you know, coming to this land and settling here and possibly being a mix of this and a mix of that. It's weird that when everyone discusses the biggest mysteries in A Song of Ice and Fire, the people that hold the keys are the people that are moved off of the page conveniently by George, Ashara Dayne, Howland Reed. Wouldn't it just be easier if both of them had the same story to tell after all these years?
It'd be a really good way to introduce it. I mean, the show wrote out Howland Reed. He never showed up. He never revealed any information. We instead got it from Bran. But in a way, Bran and Howland serve the same role, where they are these magical, seeing through the bullshit of history and knowing the truth. Yeah, I mean, I can see why they gave that to Bran instead of Howland. Like, do you want to cast Howland? Do you want to write him in? Does the audience even really know who he is at this point? Okay, I get it. But what they do for the story and what they can do for Jon are identical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oof. Wow, that was a lot of Ashara talk.
Everyone take a drink of water.
Everyone, take a shot. We talked about Ashara. Take many shots.
Hashada.
I only made one joke. I only made 2 jokes about her dying on a rock. So, okay, 3 now.
What? Sorry, I went deaf.
She went deaf for a second. And by the way, I don't know if you guys are seeing this. 185 people in the chat watching us right now. Thank you all for taking your Saturday to join me and Chloe talk about our favorite house. I do love the Danes. I mean, I wear a lot of Stark stuff and all that stuff, but the Danes are the protagonists of a different story, I would say.
Yeah, like I said, it's the shadow, right? This is Rhaegar and Lyanna's romance was so big and burnt such a huge fire that, like, everyone had to live in the shadow. Not the shadow of Ashai, different shadow, but they lived in that shadow, and things happened during that time. The stuff happening during that time is how we got to this place in the story right now. Like, yes, Lyanna and Rhaegar were big, but that stuff feels bigger.
It very much gets to the center of George's prime mystery. It's very important that the Danes are there, the Reeds are there, and the Starks. And the Targaryens. It's like these 4 houses. 2 of those you could predict as the center of the Song of Ice and Fire, but very much so the supporting roles are played by these purple star boys and the green alligator boys.
Complementary.
Yeah, complementary figures. All right, so let's move on. You have something here that you really, really, really want to talk about with Edric Dayne. So who is Edric Dayne? If people forgot him from the story, I guess, because he's a relatively minor character.
Absolutely. Blink and you miss him. You might recognize him from Arya's chapters in A Storm of Swords. So my favorite Arya chapters actually in 7 and 8, when she is with the Brotherhood without banners. She meets a boy that Gendry's real jealous about, apparently, and it's Edric Dayne. He is the Lord of Starfall. He tells us he has ash blonde hair and dark eyes that are so blue they're almost purple, right? And he came from the unnamed elder brother. So we're just going to call him elder brother, oldest brother Dayne, that guy. There's no names. There are actually, fun fact, the dad Dayne, the father of Ashara and Arthur, and the elder Dayne, his name in the show, if you zoom in during, I think it's during Two Swords, is Beric Dayne. All of my friends like to mock me about that. They made a new character out of it that they want to cosplay Beric Dayne. That's what they keep telling me. Shut up.
Great. They got the purple coloring and everything. Exactly.
But yes, so if you zoom in the white book, you can see it says Beric Dayne, the father, and blah, blah, blah. And, Barristan accompanied a bunch of like word vomit in there. But I wrote this theory about Edric Dayne, the character we're talking about, who is currently coming home from the Brotherhood without banners. He's heading, I believe he is south of the Mander with the Huntsmen and with Greenbeard.
Yes.
And we just did a huge episode that we talked about Greenbeard actually in full. Never heard anyone say that. Zionius on Reddit has a great theory about it that we talk about. We did that for our Patreon. That was really fun. But Greenbeard and the Huntsmen are going south of the Mander, and I believe Edric's with them. So he is going to head home to Starfall. I'm not sure if they're dropping him first or dropping him after. He might find a little bit of craziness south of the Mander with them.
You don't say.
I know you have a theory we'll talk about with that. But a few years ago, I think it was like 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I wrote a theory about Edric's parentage, because we know that his dad was supposed to be the elder Dayne, the elder brother Dayne. Everybody is always like, no, he could have been secretly Ashara and Ned's, or no, he's this, and blah, blah, blah. We don't have time for that. When are we going to hear about that? We just don't have time. When is George going to reveal it? Yeah. I always think, like, you have to think logically. How many chapters do we need, and when could it be revealed, and whose POV would reveal it? No, it's not happening. It's not true. There's no thematic need for that. So I wrote a theory, though, about who his mother was, because he doesn't look quite like the described Danes we know, right? Which is basically Ashara. We know Ashara has dark hair, yeah. But it makes me wonder, okay, so who was Edric's mother that made him have ash blonde hair? Was it just randomly he came out that way, or was it maybe he could have had a mom with blonde hair? I don't know. but it got me into doing a lot of date crunching. So the elder Dayne brother marries Illyria Dayne off to Beric Dondarrion. So this is going to bring us all the way back to when we were talking about the Marcher Lords earlier, who come down on the Blackmonts, the Fowlers, the Wiles, and the Manwoodies and the Ironwoods. So I think the elder Dayne brother likely married Illyria off to Beric to create a political union to stop the Marcher Lords, which are all those Stormlands and Reach guys right there along the coast, from coming down and messing with them. Illyria gets betrothed in 294 AC. She's around 12 to 14 pretty much now. So I assume highborn betrothals occur, 11 to 14, flowering age, etc., from what we've seen. The eldest Dayne brother would have been the Lord of Starfall somewhere from, at the latest, 287 AC on. So that means that the mom and dad Dayne deaths have to be somewhere like from 280 to 287 if Illyria was born 12 years before 294. So her betrothal is 294. The eldest Dayne brother is the Lord at this time of House Dayne, and he would have made that match for her at that age. Edric becomes the Lord of Starfall as early as 297 AC, so that means his dad would have had to die between 294 and 297 AC for him to be the Lord of Starfall. I do have a graph of all of this. So most of the family died off from 283 to like 290. Edric goes off to page for Beric Dondarrion at age 12, which would have been probably a couple years, after or during when Illyria and Beric get engaged. If the eldest brother had married a lady of House Fowler, possibly, him creating a match for Illyria and sending Edric to page for the Dondarrions could be very advantageous to bind the Marcher Lords to House Dayne, meaning peace between House Fowler and the Marches and a bunch of other places. And so everything that came of this ridiculous number crunching that I did one day because I was really bored, I stopped at Walgreens, I grabbed a big poster board, and I started marking up with a purple marker and gray marker different things on a timeline just so I could visualize it, is that Elio Garcia commented on it. It was the first comment. Anything Dayne, and if Elio comments, I'm like, interesting, tell me more, Elio. And he said that, for what it's worth, George's draft of the Dayne tree, meaning that he's seen the draft, lucky sucker, included Edric's mom. Yes, he didn't say if I was right or wrong, but he did say that. And that George intends possibly to publish it in the Winds of Winter, it sounds like, in the appendix.
This is one of those weird things where we know a lot about the Danes in like a broad sense, but we really don't know the details. And it's not like George isn't interested in it. Like, this is one of those things where I don't think we're ever going to know much about Ned's mother, but for some reason he wants us to know the Dayne family tree. And also, he's holding back other information, he's holding back their house words. This is the house that should have house words, and they're not there. Although you, when you posted this comment, you noticed that Elio had changed his flair.
Yeah, and I don't really go on Reddit that often. I know you might be on there, obviously, a little more with your moderation duties. But I do not go on often. But I think his is We Bring the Light, or We Bring the Dawn, or Dawn Bring This Light. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Interesting.
And I had theorized for mine. Fallen and Reborn is easier. But my two favorites were We Bring the Dawn or When the Night is Darkest. So I don't know. I never noticed he changed his flair to that. And it makes me wonder. I'm like, what do you know? What do you know that we don't? A
little something from Elio, from his obsession with Danes, perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe he got something from George. He's having a little fun with it. But yeah, I think this is really interesting in terms of what's the fallout for House Dayne after Ashara and Arthur. They hitch themselves to the dragons. It falls apart. This is their new plan. Something with the Marcher Lords, something with... But it's also really interesting that it's Mary... Beric Dondarrion comes into this, arguably one of the highest fantasy characters in the story, comes back from the dead, becomes obsessed with her lore. It's like he touches the Danes and all of a sudden the gods erupt him into magic and an important role. I mean, his name and the sigil makes sense too, but everyone that seems to be touching the Danes in the current story, their lives explode with high fantasy afterwards.
Yeah, Arya, obviously. I mean, Arya completely takes her identity away and pieces out, That's huge. I just really I think there's a lot there with the connection to the current story, and I think the Danes are definitely being interworked where maybe we aren't seeing or paying attention, but there's a lot of magical elements that they are definitely going to be involved in. And I think we'll talk about it a bit, but it makes your Dane showdown at the Tower of Joy theory so good.
All right. So this is one I wrote a few years ago. This is after I think this was after I came up with the Brienne Pretty Maris thing, which is basically that George created the Windblown and a bunch of characters in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons out of these discarded ideas that they had for the 5-year gap, which is that he was going to move the narrative forward 5 years in order to age up a lot of his characters that were uncomfortably young for what they were doing, particularly like characters like Bran and Arya and Sansa. He gave it up. But one of the things that happened in the meantime is that Edric Dayne seems poised at the end of Storm of Swords for having a much larger role. Mm-hmm. And if you move him forward 5 years, suddenly he's not just a weird little teenager with his ash blonde hair and his seemingly looking like Aegon VI, which is also a weird connection, but he would be a full-grown man at that point. He would have experience in the field. He's the Lord of Starfall. Maybe he's the Sword of the Morning. Instead, that doesn't happen. But George invents a Dane character to fill the adult kind of broken character anyway in Darkstar, Gerald Dayne, not of the main Dane house, of the cadet branch, the High Hermitage. By the way, Sanrixian, yes, we are now talking about Darkstar. You can commence fangirling and talking about him. But it's not that Edric's now dead. He's still in the story. He is still going south, like you said, with Greenbeard. He's probably on his way to Starfall, which is where Gerald Dayne is on his way to. He has slashed Marcella Baratheon or Lannister. He has escaped from Arya and Martell's whole plot thing with his head, which was kind of surprising that he was able to do that to begin with. It sort of seems like from his introduction that he's going to be one of the dumbasses that dies to Ariohota. No. Instead, Darkstar makes his escape, and Obarasand and now Aryo, sorry, weird naming convention there, are on their way to root him out from High Hermitage and the Dane lands. But Darkstar is very much sort of a ruthless character. He bemoans that he's not Sword of the Morning, that everyone only talks about Arthur Dayne, his famous cousin, and how great he was. Spoiler, Arthur was probably not as great as everyone thinks. That's a big part of his character. So if Darkstar's on his way to Starfall and so is Ned, well, there's an obvious thing for them to compete over. That is the Sword Dawn. And nobody has it right now. According to George, it's just cooling its heels, sitting what sort of
in waiting
with whatever physical challenges, like we were talking about. You have to swim across the Torrentine to get it, and then you have to put your head on a baseball bat, spin around 10 times and hit a can or something like that. Whatever it is, it's still there. And there's 2 Danes, one who has sort of a right to it in Edric. Probably he seems to be the more noble character, someone more likely to be a Sword of the Morning. But then you have his dark version. You have Gerald Dayne, who hates the main branch, who wants to usurp the power structure within Dorne. That's the whole point of him joining Arianne. He's trying to get in on the new regime, basically. So it's very likely that Gerald is going to beat Edric to Starfall, because Edric has quite a ways to go. He still has to go through the Reach. He still has to go through the Red Mountains, through the Prince's Pass to get to Starfall. So Gerald's probably going to be there first, probably going to grab Dawn, because his plan is probably to go back to Arianne to mimic Arthur Dayne, to be the Sword of the Morning for the new Targaryen ruler.
The Sword of the Evening.
The Sword of the Evening, exactly.
He's of the night.
He's of the night, yes.
Have you even read these books? Oh my god.
No, I don't read. But so if he has Dawn and he wants to go to Arianne, well, to get there, because she's in the Stormlands right now, in the Winds of Winter sample chapters. They are outside Storm's End. In order to get there, Gerald is going to have to travel probably overland through the Red Mountains and probably go right by the Tower of Joy, which, if you're coming from the Riverlands is the exact route Edric's going to have to take to get back to Starfall. You don't go over the mountains, you go through the passes. There's a really good chance that we're going to see Edric and Gerald cross paths at the Tower of Joy, and there's even some sort of background to this that kind of makes sense, because you have to remember they are not Edric and Darkstar. They are Ned and Gerald, two previous combatants at the Tower of Joy. Ned Stark, obviously, and Gerald Hightower before. And this time, we're going to have a POV on it, because Areo Hota is trailing them.
And probably the last POV on it.
Yeah, probably the last POV on it. It would be perfect, George, to have these characters that are dark versions of each other, the dark mirrors, to actually interact. What would that conversation be like with Darkstar, the second son sort of character, the sword of the evening, sort of thinking about the others in that sense and how they probably feel about the rest of the humanity, and Edric, the firstborn, the one who has the right to everything? That can make for a fascinating battle and conversation between them.
Yeah, and I imagine, I mean, I guess what I'm seeing happening is definitely Darkstar stealing Dawn, probably getting in the Kingsguard for Aegon. Definitely, we already have duck and egg. So I love that. That's like the best pun in the world.
Yes.
George, I love that one. But I'm sure maybe he'll try to steal Dawn, go north, and maybe there'll be something else where Edric does, end up coming back into the play. But he's just so young. I think George really missed that boat. Yeah. And I guess the other thing that comes to mind is that Obara's definitely going to join Darkstar, because Darkstar is going to be joining the Vengeance Plan, and Obara does not want to not do Vengeance. And Areo is going to be like, I don't want to do Vengeance. So I think it's going to be in pretty even. Areo's going to be probably upset when they killed Balon Swan. He's going to be like, we weren't supposed to kill him, we were supposed to help him. And Obara's like, you're an idiot, and now you're going to die too, and we're going to go. That's what I foresee happening, and I foresee us next seeing Darkstar, I don't know, in a war council or something, or outside a room.
Yeah,
Aegon's. That's what I foresee happening, but I really don't know how it's going to go for him, because, I don't know, there's only one Sword of the Morning that I believe in, and that's Mira Reed. But that's another theory we won't talk about today. I don't know. I don't foresee Darkstar doing much but going up in flames in King's Landing.
I think that's where he's eventually going to. He's going to hitch his ride to another Targaryen who's trying to usurp a throne, much like Arthur did with Rhaegar. Going to go up in flames, going to totally fuck over House Dayne again. But it's definitely interesting that George has these two characters running around. If you're having two Danes with such obvious conflicts, they have to interact somehow. There's no you don't write that without a purpose. So whatever the purpose is, it doesn't have to be what I'm suggesting. Although your great point, by the way, Obara and Darkstar are definitely going to kill Areo, because Obara hates Areo and she doesn't like Doran. So actually, them trying to sack Old Town, raise an army to try to go do that would be chef's kiss, especially as Euron's arriving with the Ironborn, most likely, according to one poor Quentin. And that sort of gets to what is the purpose of Darkstar. And actually, my fellow moderator, Jen Snow, had a great question about this.
Yes, I saw that. That was great.
Would Edric have become a dark character like Daryl Jane is supposed to be, or to remain more noble? I think if you look at the 5-year gap characters, you look at, I suggested the Kago Corpse Killer is Sandor, Pretty Maris is Brienne. These are extraordinarily dark versions of these characters. So it's very likely that Edric is going down the broken man path in the 5-year gap plan, that he ends up disillusioned like Darkstar is.
I mean, yeah, after serving in the Brotherhood already, you can kind of see that happening with, the broken man being the big theme when it comes to those knights that were knights but now are of the night, so to speak. I don't know. I think Edric Dayne's time to wield Dawn is past. I don't think it'll happen. And maybe it will make its way north to Jon. Maybe it will be something hugely instrumental in the fight against the others. I think it's really disappointing, because I know he wanted that 5-year gap, especially because you just want to be able to have Edric Dayne show up leading a column of an army, waving Dawn around at the front of it, have everyone have their Avengers moment or whatever. But it could make its way for Jon.
I think that's the most important point about what these two characters are supposed to do. George has put in these really specific requirements for how this sword will get involved. He seemingly does want it involved, so one of these two is going to get it in order to introduce it back into the main plot somehow. Not because it has to, but it just seems like he wants that to happen. So he's brainstorming ways for it.
There must always be a Dane at Starfall, so
yes.
I'm guessing Edric will stay home.
Sanrixian chimes in, super chat of $10. Thank you very much, Sanrixian. Release the thirst for her boy Darkstar. Yes,
How tall is he? That's my question. I just want to know how tall he is, because like I can get on board with the skinny tall guy, whatever emo hair thing. I'm indifferent. You know what I mean? It's more like, can he cut a sharp jib? Can he does he have a nice clever wit? How is the, well, I mean, Ariane liked it, so I guess it's fine. But I don't know. I have questions.
I mean, that's a fair point that George wrote it so that Darkstar basically floods Ariane's basement when she looks at him. She gets the vapors and starts fanning her face. She cannot stop how attracted she is to him. So
yeah, because he looks like her uncle.
Creepy.
No, I don't know.
It is interesting that Darkstar seems to be doing Arthur Dayne Redux and not. But he hates Arthur, but he's going to do it anyway.
You know, there were a couple in the chat. Sanrixian just said she thinks that Darkstar would be 5'10", which is disappointing. She notes, I agree, because I'm 5'11". So it's no for me. It's no if you're not. I mean, you must be this tall to ride Darkstar. I'm sorry. Wow. But then Shannon T says, isn't Howland small? And I'm like, yes, but I'm not trying to bang Howland here in this scenario. I'm trying to bang Darkstar, so I'm going to need you to keep up. Okay.
Need to ride that Dawn, you know what I'm saying?
I would make sweet love to Howland. If I had to hook up with Darkstar, it would have to be hate banging. There's a big difference.
Is there any other way to bang Darkstar? I think it has to be a hate bang. That's all he wants. Right? This conversation has taken a turn I didn't expect. Another super chat here from Stormy4400. No message to it. If you want to ask a question or anything like that in the chat. Oh, wait. They posted a comment right afterwards, so I'll read this one. Thank you very much for the super chat. My theory is Darkstar is going to the Vale. We find that he's Peter's catspaw, and that's why he tried to kill Marcella. That he'll be the Winged Knight, hence there being 8 instead of 7. That would be something if he ended up in the Vale. I think the direct line for him, because the only person he knows is Ariane Martell, so him going to her makes the most sense for me. But there's no telling how much Darkstar really knows, because we don't know that much about him at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that he'll end up going anywhere towards the north. I just don't think his role is very much specific to Ariane's whole entire arc, right? So if by some chance maybe meet in the middle, I don't see it, my friends. I don't see it. There's no time for that in The Winds of Winter. I feel like for him to show up, it's a very interesting thought, though, but the Winged Knights are actually a direct pull from history for the Vale, right? They're from the Battle of the Seven Stars and the Winged Knights and Artus Aaron. I would love to see something Dornish happen in the Vale, but I don't think we're going to have enough chapters for him also to get to Ariane, also to be involved in the Dorne plot, which is where he's supposed to be involved. And we wouldn't see him unless it was in an Elaine chapter. So logistically speaking, we already know what the first Elaine chapter is. If you've read the published Winds of Winter chapter, the sample chapter, her first chapter. She's probably only going to get 4 or 5 chapters total. Yeah. So to work Darkstar into a plot and to explain it, I don't know if we have the time for the Winds of Winter. I think he's going to go straight to King's Landing after fighting his cousin.
That's probably true, and we've gotten several requests in the chat. Apparently, we need Emmett to weigh in on hate banging as a concept. Okay.
I mean, he's fantasized about Victarion and Cersei being together for that exact reason. I think you all know how his feelings would be. He would be happy for me. Let's move on.
Let's move on for this. I think we've reached the end of the outline, it looks like. I'm just scrolling up because things got moved around. Yep.
Yeah.
So there's one more topic before we get to questions. I pulled some from my patrons and Twitter and stuff like that. But one topic would be the removal of the Danes from the TV show, where Arthur still plays into it because we go back and we see the Tower of Joy, but Ashara is essentially removed. So is Edric Dayne, Darkstar. None of these characters are in there. Do you think this is sort of a narrative streamlining idea where they just didn't have time to introduce them, or is that maybe indicative that their role will be smaller than perhaps we're theorizing today? I think I know your answer, but I think it's a good question to ask.
I think we're going to see an increase. I mean, we've had at least 2 to 3 mentions of Danes per book almost on average, if you put them all together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a good question. I think that if we see anything, we'll see them, one in the beginning. So let's put this logistically, Winds of Winter,
okay,
right?
Let's do this.
We got Ariohota chapter, 1 chapter, right? Probably over. I'm not trying to stay positive for him. That's excessive, Matt. So Ariohota, we got 1 chapter, maybe 2 if he bleeds his way back to die in front of Doran or something. We got. I mean, how are we gonna see Quentin's bones come home?
It's got to be through REN.
It's going to have to be a letter. So yeah. REN, you're going to have 5 to 7 chapters.
So Darkstar is probably there.
Darkstar is probably in there. I think that their presence out of the show, I mean, yeah, you can do the story without the Danes. I get it. You can. Mm. You can do it without them. It makes it a more enriched story. It fills the story out, having the Danes in it. I think for the show, you can't include all that. It's just too muddy. I mean, most people don't even know who like a quarter of the real character's names are, right? Who just watch the show with no background knowledge, no podcasts, no jumping into the books, no nothing, you know? That's something that I think is, you have to pay attention to that. And I'm not saying people are stupid that don't read it, but you have to think like, my grandparents message me and go, I like that dragon girl.
Yeah, I had the same things. It was like, explain to me the main characters. I'm like, boy, if we tried to introduce like characters like Arthur, Dayne, and Ashara seriously in the show, the major characters are going over people's heads. Like these tertiary characters, even as important as we think they are, not going to go great. They're lore heavy and they have little active impact on the story. I
mean, like the Martells, we see that there. Like, honestly, I wanted the Sand Snakes to be real characters because that's what's great about them in the books is that, you know, they have different actual personalities. One is nice, one is mean and drunk, one is slightly skankier than the rest. One, you know, like, I'm sorry, okay, those aren't real things, but like they have a little bit more of personality and actually do things. And I don't know. I think they could have done better, obviously, at writing certain things in the hit HBO experience, Game of Thrones. But I think they did as good as they could because there's so much to Dorne you can't explain. You can't explain this story in the show, man. You just can't.
No, there's so much there behind Doran and his revenge and the interactions between him and Oberyn. It's, you know, there's not enough time for everything. So I think that kind of covers the whole where are the Danes in the show. I think they're likely streamlining victims rather than importance, I would say. Like, we don't need Ashara to show up for them to be important in the narrative. We still have Edric, we still have Darkstar, we still have Dawn kicking around somewhere. So those are plots that are probably going to pay off. Maybe not like end game, super important to what's going on, but George has indicated from the beginning that he does want them to be a part of his end game story.
And that's the thing, like, you need flashbacks to do Game of Thrones. You need flashbacks. If you want to improve how Game of Thrones was done, decent flashbacks, which they did a great job in the later seasons of finally implementing them. And I know they wanted to stay away from it as much as possible, but it did help. I mean, those brand visions were crazy, right? That had all of us going, oh, like when people say, wow, the Winds of Winter was such a well-written episode, the Sept, everything that was nuts, the R plus L equals J. Yeah, it all culminates on that buildup of stuff. So for once, they did those crazy little brand flashes and it meant something. And it's like, what if you had just... If you guys just, and it's expensive to do that, okay? Like, you can't just get people in outfits to film 10 seconds and say, hey, thanks so much. Here's your paycheck for $1 million for the year. You know, I mean, I get it.
You also need to put, like, name tags on their foreheads, like Ashara Dan. And then do, like, a history and lore. Actually, they did do that. They did do history and lore videos that they put in the extras. That I think
and she is in there.
She's in there a lot. And so is Arthur. Nothing about Edric and Darkstar, so they pretty much just stayed to the main two, which fair enough. Those are the, and if you're doing backstory, those are the most important, whereas Edric and Darkstar are future.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's grab some questions here. You guys in the chat, start throwing them in there. I have some that me and Chloe are gonna start with. Also super chats if you want to make sure yours get picked. So the first one was from one of my patrons, Maester Mary, who recently started a podcast with Clint of I forgot, I can't remember the name right now. Hang on a second. Laws of Ice and Fire. Yes. I need to find the name of her new podcast. God damn it, I feel bad about this now. Somebody drop it in the chat. One of the mods will probably have it. Her question, well, she asked it a bunch, but the first one is, what do you think happened between Ned and Arthur Dayne at the Tower of Joy? And I think that's a really interesting question. We touched on it. Is the show versions correct? Likely in some cases that Arthur would overwhelm Ned Stark, who we know is not a strong fighter himself. He's the quiet wolf. He's not the wild wolf, that kind of thing. I think it's very likely that the show got it right in the sense that it probably came down to just the two of them, everyone else dead. You would expect Arthur to kill, of those people that showed up, most of them himself. Gerald Hightower and Oswell Went probably took down one each themselves. In terms of, we're talking about like Hashara and Howland Reed's impact and what ended up happening really there in negotiations, I tend to think that Arthur did just die, and it's Ashara who sort of picked up the pieces afterwards to build out this plan. Because it seems like Arthur went into it knowing he was going to die, that he was doing it for a specific purpose. I don't think he would stop and go, you know what? Oh, this is really dumb. Rhaegar's dead. I don't believe in this crap anymore. He probably went through with it.
Yeah, I that's the thing that makes me wonder, like, if it was pre-planned, right? Like, I'm pretty, I wouldn't be surprised if not like every step, like, then you're going to move this way, Arthur, and you're going to let this dude do this, and then Howland is going to step in, and boom, boom. But I think, like, it had to have been pre-planned that Ashara would have reached out to either side / talk to both sides and, like, know what's happening. Arthur probably would have known, like you said, this is his time to go. The prophecy probably says that he has to go as long as they can wake the savior. I feel like there has to be dialogue missing from the fever dream.
There definitely has to be. I mean, we know Ned doesn't remember all of it or even all of it accurately, so that's one key piece of information we can definitely go back to. Especially with Howland showing up. It's not just going to be Jon information. If Howland shows up, we'll definitely learn about Arthur Dayne. He obviously knows the whole story. He's the only one alive that still knows. Assuming Shara's not alive.
Yeah, exactly. Like, one way, if you went either way. And I mean, that is, like, why Ashara and Howland being together makes sense, because it is closing up that loop, right? Because those are the people that know frickin' everything.
They know, like, everything.
Everything. And it's so convenient that they're moved off the page.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Got a super chat here from the infamous Frank Bum. He says, assuming Ashara is true, wow, big words from Frank, what's Howland Ashara's role following their convo with Jon. Can they really sit out the War for the Dawn? Part 2, Electric Boogaloo down the neck. Maybe they guide Mira or something else. Great stream. Thank you very much for the compliment, Frank. Glad you showed up. I saw a lot of your comments while we were going through. Yeah, that's a good point. Is Howland and Ashara, if Ashara is still alive, are they just information dumps? Or is there something more to them?
I'd imagine so, right? I'd imagine they are little info dumps that we're just going to get from them in the end. I don't think we're actually going to see them do things. However, they have already done stuff, right? They sent Mira and Jojen out to get Bran knowledge, to go teach him some stuff, school that kid. So I think that is what they're doing. You know, I imagine Howland recognizes the signs of the green site in Jojen. He's like, when I was your age, then I went over to Coachella and got real bombed with those green men. I just think that maybe that's all they need to do. Send them off to defend. I mean, it's not the first time that they're sending off possible Danes to go defend a Stark child.
Yeah, not the first time at all. And Howland's way is non-confrontational. I mean, like, look at what he did at the tourney of Harrenhal. Him getting the crap beaten out of him by those squires is what inspires Lyanna Stark to become the Knight of the Laughing Tree and ends up with Rhaegar and her meeting. If Howland doesn't put himself in a position to have the crap beaten out of him, a personal sacrifice himself, like bodily and emotionally, none of that probably happens, and you have to question, is Howland, much like Jojen, Howland's probably playing his role, much in the way we're talking about with Arthur. That is the thing that, if Ashara is alive, that's probably the idea that binds them together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can just like picture it, Ashara sending her children out to war, knowing, just like what happened with her brother, that one of them isn't coming back, and knowing that they have to protect the next prince that was promised.
Another promised prince.
Yep.
Super chat here from Low Links. Their question is, what's the Danes' endgame? Who survives? Who rules? I think that Darkstar is doomed. That he's gonna die. I hope it's Edric that that his brush with the magical and the prophetic world of Beric Dondarrion has done the same to him that it did for his uncle and aunt, Ashara and Arthur. That he's going, that I really do hope that he ends up with Dawn and he leads like the armies of Dorne, or at least the armies of the Torrentine, up to help Jon. And even though he's too young to do anything, I don't think you're going to stop little Edric from making sure that he has a place in the Great War, especially after his interactions with Beric, who has been talking non-stop about the duty to the Starks and what you need to do in order to stop the Great Other, basically.
Yeah, I think it'll be Easter egg if we do get him. I'd like that, just him kind of showing up with Dawn. That would be cool too. I don't know. I'm still torn. I think Dawn could show up for Jon somehow, but it doesn't really. Now the ultimate would be if Jon went south to the Neck, went to Howland and Ashara, and was given the sword. That would be like if that happened, you would hear me from like your home. You'd be like, it would just be me going, yeah, boy.
High-fiving yourself over and over again, causing earthquakes.
It'd be nuts though, right?
Yeah,
like what a crazy, like, also this sword is, it's probably not gonna happen, but that would be really cool. I just worry, like, I don't know how it's gonna get north from King's Landing, because anyone that shows the hell up for King's Landing for like, from this date to this date, is gonna want to watch the weather, because it's feeling pretty green, pretty hot, you know?
Things are getting pretty wild down in King's Landing. Darkstar has a meeting with the God of Fire, I would say.
A lot of people. What's the quote? The Dornishmen burn to avenge Elia and her children is such an apt line of what'll probably happen. So I do foresee them dying. I think Edric will survive. Even if we don't see him, we'll at least hear from him a couple times. And I think he's safe thanks to the 5-year gap not happening.
Probably.
Yeah,
he's too young to make a effective battle sacrifice sort of character.
Yeah, which probably would have happened originally, right? That could have been in the original.
Let's see here. Got another question from Sanrixian. We kind of touched on this a little bit. We answered the first two parts of her question already. She wants to know, is all of this tied to the prince that was promised like everything else seems to be? Are the Danes really read into this? Are they on board, like, with saving the world from the others, even from somewhere as far away from Dorne? And I think that's the key question to the Danes. Are they a shaggy dog story? Are they trying to do this and they're not going to get there? Or is this, I don't know. A lot of this is also assumptions. Like, we made a lot of assumptions in this stream. Much of this is not for certain. We're trying to read into things. Like, even the suggestion that Rhaegar and Arthur bonded over prophecy, I mean, that makes sense. But nowhere does it say that kind of thing. So it's it's also likely that the Danes are just another Marcher Lord house, or not exactly Marcher Lord, but just another house that was trying to go for power and failed. But it doesn't seem that way. I really do think that one way or another, Dawn and the Lord of Starfall will have some role to play in the War for the Dawn when we eventually get there.
Yeah, some sort of role. Definitely it's a decreased role now, though. That's the biggest bummer of all of it, that we can't really see what we wanted to out of it. But it raises a few questions on the regular plot. I mean, I think one of the theories a lot of people are probably at this point is that, like, the prince that was promised isn't one person. Like, maybe this is totally galaxy brain, but maybe in the end, like, the whole goal is, like, everybody has to join together to defeat it, which is something that everybody's not doing because a lot of the houses are busy with swords at each other's necks, right? When the real threat is north. That's the whole entire thing. That's the whole book series, right? Everybody has their knife out and they just want to go at it with everyone else. But the Danes don't.
Yeah.
But I think there are just several prince that was promised, right? I think Bran has a big role. I think Dany has a huge role. I think Jon has a huge role. Even characters like Arya and Sansa have great big roles. They might not be necessarily related to, but they're at least related to what comes next. How do we have a functioning nation after it's decimated by ice zombies? I think House Dane staying out of all of the political wars are a big factor in this too, saying, like, hey, we're focused on the what comes next and on the war. We're not focused on politics.
Yeah, those are great points. But the Danes, it's definitely fascinating for where this all goes. It sort of reveals almost a way about how you view A Song of Ice and Fire, how you view the Danes. If you don't value those kind of concepts, then they seem boring and they seem small. If you do value high fantasy, the magic, the ideas of prophecy, then all of a sudden they are shining like a shower's purple eyes. They are a perfect example of all these things George loves writing about. There's a question up ahead. If Mance isn't Rhaegar, then who is Mance? Kind of a different question. Definitely not a member of House Dane. There have been theories for forever about who Mance Rayder really is.
I can tell you, Mance was a guy
who
ended up injured past the wall on arranging, and he fell in love with a free folk woman who patched him up and sewed up his cloak and put red patches on it. And then, after that, he decided, screw this penal colony. Why am I there? Why am I just, crushing my soul working here against these people that are obviously humans on the other side of the wall? And he defects to the free folk and he leads them beyond the wall. Eventually, he goes out there trying to stop the genocide that's happening against them on every side, whether it be from Stannis, who's making them get rid of basically their entire culture just to have, like a piece of old bread, or if it's, the Tyroshi slavers coming to prey upon them. So that's who Mance is. I don't know. That's pretty much what I got for you.
So are you saying that Mance Rayder is himself a fully fledged character and does not need a secret identity to make him important? That he has an interesting role in the story that is completely divulged from this weird Rhaegar connection? That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, and if I could just piggyback off of that, he was in love with Corin Halfhand. Have a great day. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, wow.
They did love each other. I'm just saying. They really
Morin?
did love each other. Oh, my God, yeah.
Cants?
Morin?
Quants? No, it has to be Morin. The other one doesn't work.
Man's hand? Man's hand what?
The man's hand? God. Oh, my God. Okay, good question here from Anne Lieberman. She has a question about Hashara. Do you think that Mira and Jojen know their mother is Hashara if she is Hashara? How would that knowledge affect their actions? Go.
Hey, Anne. You might not have been here when we talked about it a little bit ago, but I think the biggest thing about that is, like, yes, they absolutely have to know that she is likely who she is, especially with Mira's whole entire story. Like, how does Mira know this huge tourney at Harrenhal story and know what happened on all sides when Howland was only concerned with one side, which was her backside? And her front side, I guess. Her face side, too. Her face side, too.
I think it would only, like you're saying, I think it would only increase Jojen's belief in his abilities if he knows his mother was Hashara, and that it would be like another vehicle for confirming the idea that prophecy and magic are not just a weird Howland thing or a thing that's happening to him. It's a global thing. It's like,
well, and you're bringing those bloodlines. Yeah. You're bringing those bloodlines together. You know, you're bringing together the Great Empire of the Dawn, speculatively speaking, and you're bringing the Marsh Kings, speculatively speaking, together, and that produces magic babies.
Totally magic babies. All the magic babies. That's the end game of Hashara.
Magic babies. I hope they have more magic babies.
Oh, they definitely are. A super chat here from Aaron M., one of my patrons. Thanks very much, Aaron. 1999. Actually, they were talking about this in the chat, how for some reason she couldn't get it to exactly 20. I don't understand the super chat system. It's weird. But anyway, another awesome Sunday cast. Thank you. Yeah, she was here for your Emmett's stream last time too.
Oh, good.
So she's gone quite far from You're on the Black Hole to High Fantasy Danes in a week. But yeah, a little tangential, but if Dawn is Lightbringer, what role does Ice play in the story? Do you think Jaime will bring Widow's Wail north like in the show? So this is sort of the idea that comes out of the fandom sometimes, the sword theory. Is the right sword the important part of what's going to happen with the War for the Dawn and Jon Snow? Like, if Jon ends up with like Dawn and it's actually Lightbringer, this is a long-term theory. People have thought for a long time that Dawn is Lightbringer because it is so unique, that it is so odd and different from everything else. Like, well, obviously it must be Lightbringer or something like that. I don't. This is my problem with the Danes story and with Edric and Darkstar is, if Dawn's that important, then why hasn't it shown up before now? We're pretty far into the story. Normally you would arm your fantasy protagonist with his magic sword by now. Like, is this like a last second throwing Dawn to Jon and he grabs it and then lights in the flames? He's like, oh my God, I'm Azor Ahai. And then he goes fighting people. It's kind of hard to say, because Jon would not want to give up Longclaw. There's a strong personal attachment to him in Mormont. That's the reason he carries it, and it's his. That's the difference between Ice and Longclaw for Jon. Ice belongs to Robb. That's Robb's sword. Mm-hmm. Longclaw is his. It's the one he earned. He thinks very strongly about what it means that he bears Mormont's sword. So if he ends up with Dawn, I mean, it's hard to say why.
So I think this is like an age-old argument, right? Of what's going to happen. Like we were talking about, like, it would be so cool if Jon, like, brandishes the sword, yada, yada, whatever. But at the same time, I think that there's something really important about having Longclaw, especially if the end Game of Thrones is anything to kind of look at. And I think the show kind of streamlined it so much that we don't know if something crazy magical is going to happen. I love the theory of reforging Ice, right? Of Jaime and Brienne reforging it into one sword and then it becoming like, that's actually Lightbringer. I love that theory. That's a cool theory. I just like it, especially because to me that is ice and fire coming together, right? Literally, ice and fire in the flames. Yeah. And that is forging a sword of ice and fire. And I do love that. this is something that it could go either way. It could be Jon get the sword, and that's to show he was the prince. But I think if he is choosing in the end, if he is going to honor the realm, and that must be more than one man's honor, his entire arc of not wanting things, not wanting royalty, wanting to just save the realm, I don't think he'll brandish Dawn. No. It coincides with that idea of like having several The Prince That Were Promised characters. I don't think one sword is going to stop the others. I think there'll have to be some sort of something else magical happen. I just don't think a magical sword is what's going to do it in. I think it's been talked up far too much.
I mean, there's a reason the others surround themselves with endless armies of the undead. It's specifically so you cannot kill them by stabbing them with Valyrian steel. That is the purpose of their armies. So the show's version of that is they had Arya slipping through them using their hubris to kill them with a Valyrian steel dagger. Although we do know that they initially intended for Jon to do it, that he was going to kill the Night King with Longclaw. Both of those sound fine to me. I mean, there's literally no difference between Dawn and Valyrian steel in terms of what we know it can do. It would just be like a really cool Easter egg on top. Yeah.
Well, and that's why I think it's even less likely to be like a thing that, like, I don't think we'll get some scene of Jon like suddenly revealing the sword and it's Dawn and it's Lightbringer and now he's the prince that was promised and he's gonna go slay the others and then he and Daenerys are gonna have babies and rule the kingdom together. Like, I just don't see that happening. I just see him like fighting with Longclaw. I mean, Longclaw is his now.
And George could have already gone down that path because the obvious parallel is Aragorn receiving the shards of Narsil, right? That's the scene he could have made with Dawn, but George has decided in the first book to essentially say, I'm not doing that with my fantasy hero. Here's his sword up front. He's not gonna, there's that whole subplot of Aragorn getting the sword and then using it to command the army of the dead, and then that sword is actually magic and like a key part to his victory. George has kind of kicked that one to the curb already.
Yeah. Well, and it still could happen. I mean, because then you have the obvious, like, while I say it wouldn't be a thing he would do, there you go. It's very Lord of the Rings, very medieval fiction, very fantasy. Maybe he wants to go big high fantasy.
Maybe. I mean, he could. Let's see here. Let's grab another few questions. Let's grab one here from... Actually, let's grab this from Maester Mary. She left another question. What is your favorite Dawn tinfoil? My favorite Dawn tinfoil is that it has this weird glowing quality to it, where there's sort of this thing with Valyrian steel where it looks alive sometimes, like it dances with light, or the color that you put into the sword sometimes seems real. My favorite tinfoil is that Dawn has the same thing because Valyrian steel absorbs souls, that they're like soul blades, the sort of thing, and it's stupid tinfoil, but it kind of makes sense in terms of George's other stories, like the Whisper Jewel idea I talked about from Night Flyers, where he loves the idea of inanimate objects that are magical containing human souls and that empowering them in some way.
Oh, and earlier a couple of people were talking about his dark materials in the chat, because there is a knife that's similar in a kind of way, the subtle knife, literally the subtle knife that is like the magical sword. So it makes me think of that with the soul stuff. That's interesting. I think, I don't think it's as much of a tinfoil. I don't have a lot of tinfoil per se about Dawn, but I love, have you ever seen the someone building Dawn out of meteorite video?
No. Oh, yeah,
so
yes, I have. The meteorite sword, yeah.
Yes, someone actually did Dawn out of meteorite, like forged from meteor. Did the Game of Thrones version of Dawn, and it was awesome actually. And you can see like the scratch kind of pattern. They go like crisscross. You can see the crisscrosses up close, and it was just really cool. And so I imagine it has to have that texture along with the glowing. Because I too imagine that it glows a very iridescent, moon glowy, like beautifulness. I don't know. I just see it. It has to be glowing.
It does glow essentially. It's alive with alive with light and glows like milk glass or something like that.
Yeah.
The end state of the tinfoil is that if you think that Dawn is Lightbringer, then the soul inside Lightbringer is still Nissa Nissa.
Oh, that's depressing. And then okay, I get you. I see where you're...
It's exactly brutal enough for George to do to somebody to trap them inside a sword for 10,000 years with no escape.
The word was like a spear thrust to the heart.
Yeah. Jen Snow says Nightblood in Stormlight Archive is similar too. Yeah, the idea of a soul sword is well known within the fantasy genre. Mm-hmm. George would not have to make it up for it to be real, and he likes talking about that kind of stuff anyway. Mm-hmm. Shannon T has been quite insistent for a while that we talk about the Daenerys plus Aerys equals Daenerys possibilities. So there's a lot of theories that go around the Tower of Joy, and these are alternative birth theories, like that Dany and Jon are twins, or that Dany is actually Rhaegar and Lyanna's child, etc., etc., etc. I'm just going to throw this out there. We didn't discuss it because we're both RLJ convinced. They make for interesting subplots, and you can use them to prop up ideas like the Dornish master plan, or all these, or like a Luke and Leia kind of situation. But it seems to be relatively straightforward at this point that it is actually RLJ, and that Daenerys is not... She's exactly who she says she is. She is Rhaella and Aerys' child, and that she grew up in Bravos and lemon trees, blah, blah, blah.
So, and if you wanted to play that way, like, George has basically said Howland and Ashara both would have been born around the same time. They would have been born somewhere around 260 to 265. They would be in their earlier mid-30s right now in the current story where we are. So with that knowledge, that makes it so, like, if you give a 10-year range, Ashara would have to be anywhere from, during the tourney at Harrenhal, like 17 to 22 is kind of what I imagine her age at most. And she died in 283, quote unquote. Now, when she goes to court, it is said that she showed up to court for a brief time as one of Elia's ladies in waiting. Now, Elia would have just come to court for the tourney. So she would have come to court at the tourney time with Elia. Month-wise, it could align in those few months that she was at court that she could have gotten impregnated by Aerys. However, for the way that Barristan like remarks of when she had a stillborn and died, and for when she dies in the story, that's too mixed up because Ned comes to her and then she dies after that. So that would have had to be a few months after having Aerys' stillborn, but the tourney itself was way before then. So it doesn't line up. She wasn't at King's Landing. She wasn't at King's Landing when Brandon was there, so everyone should mark that off their page. That's the worst one. Like, she did not bang Brandon in the cells, you guys. There's no time for it. It's a cool theory. I get it for all of you that just think that, like, Ashara is the hot girl that bangs. That's cool too, I guess. But, like, it just doesn't work out time-wise. So I don't know. I think the timeline is really important. Like, there's no way that Ashara could have gotten pregnant at the tourney, and then when she actually had the kid, like, it just doesn't line up.
It also doesn't really do much. Like, let's say Dany is Ashara's child. Okay, well, the only way that's been used is that Barristan also has the hots for Dany. Okay. Is it because she looks like her supposed mother, Ashara? That's a pretty weak payoff for what would be an incredibly complex and impactful reveal on her part. Like, the identity the identity that she's Ashara Dayne's child doesn't do anything for Dany. Like
what does it matter?
But she connects to Rhaella because of the abuse through Aerys in the same way Viserys does to her. Or maybe she will if she starts.
Yeah, she doesn't know about it yet. Totally know about it. But then Jen Snow brought up another thing. Dany's 9 months younger than Jon.
Yeah.
And Jon's 9 months older than Dany. So it just doesn't. That timeline doesn't really work for that. Ashara would have basically been dead.
Also, they would have had to also smuggle her to Dragonstone or like hide Dany's. I don't know. It's so complicated. Like, George kind of goes against a lot of these ideas in the Dornish plotline when he has the line "Someone always tells." For all these complicated, baby swapping secret identity things about Jon and Dany to work, they require a huge amount of people to shut their mouths. Whereas the simple idea of RLJ is basically the Danes shut up and Ned shut up, and those are the only people that know.
The other thing with the Aerys thing that kind of gets
Howland,
me,
sorry.
Howland, yeah. The other thing that gets me about the Aerys thing that just like makes me go, is that the whole idea, like, so the first book, we spend the whole book being told the seed is strong,
Yeah.
and Ned doesn't understand that Jon Arryn is saying, like, it was about the incest. But flash forward, it's a meta commentary on Jon. The seed is strong. It's Jon came out with black hair. Jon came out not Valyrian looking. Jon came out looking like a Stark. So for the seed to be strong, for Dany and Aerys to kind of get together, like,
yeah, it just makes more sense. It is what it is, and it's Rhaegar, and Ashara's role is something else that the suicide thing doesn't really make sense, especially with the knowledge that Jon is actually not her child. I mean, like, that's the only way it makes sense, that like Ned went there and stole Jon from her, ripped baby Jon from her arms, and she couldn't stand it, and then jumped off a tower. Like, that does not seem like the sort of thing Ned would do. I don't know.
So the exact, where is it? Basically, let's see, Ashara being at court, I should have to go reference my own work, you know what I mean? In the first,
my own.
I totally get that. I'm like, who wrote this? I don't know. It just doesn't line up for like when Elia actually came to court, because that would have been late 280 to spring 281. She married Rhaegar in early 280 AC in King's Landing, and they moved to Dragonstone. Later in 280 AC, Elia has Rhaenys, Princess Rhaenys, and they come to King's Landing and present to Aerys and Rhaella Rhaenys. And then the tourney is literally like the next month, pretty much. So Ashara would have had to come to court then at 280 AC. Now, the rebellion, you guys, lasted a little longer than that. It wasn't just like, and then the tourney happened and then the rebellion happened, right? Robert's rebellion.
It was a year later, wasn't it?
Year later, yeah. So for Ned to come and tear a baby from her arms, and she was so upset that she flew off a tower, it just doesn't make sense for it to be this is over a year later. I don't know. I think that's the point, though, right? Like, George is throwing us off the scent on purpose. Exactly. We have 18 stories. Well, I think that she's actually the chick with the stretch marks because, girls have babies traveling with Aegon. Or I think this. Like, it's literally, that's there for us to be thrown off the scent of whatever is actually the truth about Ashara.
Right. You're supposed to feel when Cersei says it, like, okay, so this probably means it's not true, because Cersei tends to believe quite a lot of false things. Like when she's the info dump, that is not a trusted character, a POV that would be like, yes, Cersei has a good handle on this situation,
Yeah.
So let's, I would say this is probably last call for questions. We're probably going to get going in a little bit. So anything last, throw it in the chat now, and we'll see if we can get to it. I'm going to scroll up and see if find like one or two more. We exhausted the doc, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
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 Let's see. Apparently there's questioning about what you're wearing. Are you wearing sweatpants? Okay.
No, I'm wearing legging-ish things. I don't know, whatever. They're like pants. They have a button. So I feel like I'm an adult today.
I'm not an adult today. I woke up and went to go get liquor.
Oh, well, earlier I was telling you, but we can't have that. So it must be nice. I have to mail it in. Thanks for bragging. I'm almost out of vodka. Yeah, I woke up this morning, 6 a.m. We got together, finished sewing up our masks, went out to go get groceries. So I have been clothed since like 6:25 a.m.
Had to go out today. I am wearing basketball shorts since Aaron unmasked.
Oh, there you go.
That's how it goes. Uncle Joe asked about. Okay, so this is something we did not touch on at all about Ashara, and it is the Quaithe Ashara theory. Wants to know about Quaithe's mask made of starlight. Now, Chloe's sigh and eye roll should tell you what she already thinks about it, but. We've sort of made an indirect case for it during the stream because we've been promoting this idea that Ashara is tuned into magic, that she is tuned into prophecy, and there are a few characters more tuned into that than Quaithe. And basically the main reason people think that she's Ashara is that she's wearing a mask. And it's like, well, if she's wearing a mask, George must be disguising her identity, therefore it must be important, etc., etc., etc. Who's missing in the story?
When I was a kid, I dreamed that I could fall or fly, but I fell. Yada, yada. Yeah, I get it. I'm not trying to be dismissive. I'm sorry. No, I understand why people think it could be because stars and we don't know anything about her, but it's also at this point, like, is she even real? We don't know. I know. That's actually my favorite theory, fake Quaithe, that like she's not actually real. She is. She totally is. I don't know. I made in my part 2 of A Falling Star in Westeros, my analysis of Edric Dayne, which is now getting to about 19,000 words, everybody. Ooh. Slowly but surely. Someday I'll write it again, I promise, before John Ice Eyes is in the chat asking more. Not there yet, but part 3 and 4 definitely are open and like have things in them. They're just not out yet. But part 2, I spend basically deconstructing why people think these theories are true, right? Like what theories are there and why do you think they're true? And much like the Septa Lemore theory, if you dive into the Quaithe as Ashara theory, it's easy, right? You're like, oh yes, perfect. This is where she went. But Quaithe doesn't have mentions of her eyes. Wouldn't Daenerys be eager to explore a purple-eyed woman that comes to her? This is the first woman with purple eyes. Daenerys, of all people, would be like, are you Valyrian? Oh my god, are you a Targaryen? Oh my god, I want to go home. Yeah, like she'd be like, I want to go home. If she had anything majorly important about her eyes, the audience would be aware. I mean, in A Dance with Dragons alone, Dany focuses on Barristan and Missandei's eye colors really hard. And of course, we learn about the Shadowbinders of Ashai that it takes years of prayer and sacrifice and study. So yes, the theory goes Ashara Dayne is in hiding from the rebellion. She trains to become a Shadowbinder. She has 15 to 20 years of hiding under her belt to suddenly become heckin' mystical, wear a mask, communicate to Daenerys with a glass candle, haunt her dreams, meet her in Karth. But Shadowbinders are of the night, man. They work their art in darkness. Ashara and her family are kind of the light, right? With Arthur as sort of the morning. So little text about Quaithe and House Dayne. It's hard to rebuff, but it's also hard to prove. If Quaithe is using a glass candle to communicate with Daenerys or is aware of them, she's probably using a more Valyrian method of magical contact, which we've kind of talked about isn't very Dayne. Right? They don't seem to have any history with that kind of idea, which is funny because I know a lot of people in the chat were just discussing what if Dawn was actually a glass candle secretly. Yeah. So that's interesting. That's an interesting thought. But I don't know, 15 years, all of a sudden wants to be a Shadowbinder, 15 years of practicing. I just don't think it's enough, man. Don't think it's enough.
I think there's a lot of crossover between Ashara is Quaithe and also the Corn is Arthur and Rhaegar and Mance. They are very similar, especially in terms of what we know about their roles were when they were alive or Shara dead. But when we last heard from them, what they were trying to do, the things they were interested in, the starlight. I mean, like you look at Mance Rayder, he wears Targaryen colors. He has like all these markings of that he's maybe a Targaryen in disguise, especially with the fact that his name sounds so fake, that his name literally means Mance Rayder, so somebody that breaks into houses. That just seems like a pseudonym, doesn't it? It doesn't seem like a real name. And that's sort of the same thing with Quaithe, where she could be anything. She could be Ashara, but I think she's there for George to explore the role and what she may have been rather than who she actually is now, which is basically the prevailing idea behind what Mance and Corran are. They are stand-ins for the characters he will not put on the screen anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You can look at Septa Lemore and you can look at Quaithe as like, these were just like your 5-year gap removed kind of theories, right? Like these are the other versions that she could have turned out like. I don't know. I think the purple eyes is a big deal. It's a big deal to have those purple eyes peering out from beneath the mask or peering at you from her behind her stretch marks at Tyrion. These are just like people that are obsessed with dragons and interested in Valyrian culture. Not calling out purple eyes would be my first thing of, feels a little retconned.
Especially because Tyrion seems to have an encyclopedic knowledge of all the hot women in Westeros. If he's not remembering Ashara Dayne, then nobody is. If he's not recognizing her, I mean.
Well, he wouldn't know much about her because he had never seen her per se, like as a youngster. But I mean, even then, he would at least notice the eyes.
Yeah. He picks John Connington out of nowhere. He's like, pluck, I know who you are, you old griff. You are J-Con. And he's like, fuck, you got me. That's sort of what his character does. I think, though, this is one of the things that I wanted to say when we were talking about Corran and Mance. The theories are they are noticing things that are there. There are definitely indications that she could be Ashara Dayne, that Quaithe could be Ashara, that these characters could be Mance and Rhaegar, but that's not the full story.
Oh, would you say this is a case of keep reading?
Yes. I keep reading, George. Let's take one more, because my voice is starting to go too.
Oh, I feel ya. I don't have that problem, but I feel ya.
This happened with Emmett too. My voice has started going at the end. What's this about a mist theory? Bernie wants you to talk about?
That's the gray mist theory.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it hasn't come up in a while, and if you guys know Wiz the Smith, I don't do Westeros forums, but I know he's talked about it there as well. But gray mist, whenever it appears in the story, check out when gray mist appears because something mystical is happening, like Bloodraven and Bran checking in. So just do a couple look-throughs. It's over at my blog at liesandarborgold.com, but there's a good amount of misty stuff going on. Look at Winterfell with Theon in it and Dance.
Yeah, definitely.
They're all over that.
That's true. Rain or Shine. Oh, God, they got me again. This happened last stream. I started reading their name like it was a real name and not realizing that it's a phrase. God, got me again, Rain or Shine. They bring up a good point in Shiera Seastar. That's the other character that is hugely influenced by star symbolism and magical
Speaking
ideas.
of Bloodraven.
Yeah, if there's somebody that's Quaithe and it's a backdoor secret like identity, I would put my money on Shiera because like her pseudo husband's still alive too. And
she was called a sorceress.
Yes, definitely. Like something like Melisandre, where she has found a way, like so many characters seem to do, tap into the magic of the world and live long beyond your mortal coil. That would be super Shiera.
Yeah, especially when you consider that she would be guiding Daenerys with Bloodraven guiding Bran.
Mm-hmm.
And, following that, I mean, if you want to follow that train of her being alive, like you look at Quaithe's motives. What is Quaithe telling Dany? Quaithe is telling Dany, embrace the dragon, be the dragon. And if Quaithe is Shiera Seastar, what was Shiera Seastar? She was Targaryen. The dragon bastard, though. And what is Dany coming back to Westeros possibly being seen as?
The dragons.
Yeah, I mean, look at her coming to Westeros with young Griff already situated himself as, I'm the good Targaryen. I'm here to be your prince and king, and I've been raised to be a king. But then you have Shiera Seastar, a bastard Targaryen, who is whispering in Dany's ears, bring him fire.
Wouldn't it be totally Shiera if, again, she found herself in the middle of a Targaryen civil war?
Well, if Bran really is, absolutely, and if Bran really is, going to play a huge role in the politics in the end of the series, that right there is a very interesting comparison of Shiera behind Dany as a driving force and Bloodraven behind Bran.
It's like it's Bittersteel and Bloodraven all over again, especially because we know that Bloodraven and Sheer did not end on good terms.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's still, I mean, he's basically a tree at this point, and he still finds himself thinking about his failures with her alongside his failures with Daemon and Bittersteel. And it'd be really interesting if that failed romance has turned into sort of a rivalry between the old gods and the powers of fire, which Dany represents.
Yeah, ice preserves, fire consumes.
They are the opposites. Although there's also the good theory that that Melisandre is Melanie Seastar, written by Yolkboy of Radio Westeros, that Melisandre is their child, the linking of the two halves.
I think that's a fun theory, absolutely.
I think it's... Yolkboy doesn't put out too many theories because he's very down to earth about stuff, and I think that is typically him in terms of how well researched and how put together it is and how believable it could be. I mean, how believable it is and that it might come true. That'd be super interesting, especially with the narrative impact of Melisandre fighting against her father and not knowing who it is. That would be cool. All right, so I think that's the end of the Dane.
Oh my God.
Quaranstream. We went everywhere, Chloe. We somehow ended up on Shiera Seastar from talking about House Dane.
You took me to Asshai. You took me all the way back to Dorne, to Tyros, to the north. You took me everywhere. Thanks for the trip, buddy.
This has been just a lovely trip down the falling stars, I would say.
Yes, down the falling stars.
We rode it today. We rode the falling star. But why don't you go ahead and do your plugs and I'll do mine, and we'll get out of here so that we can probably go both take naps.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much again for having me on. You guys can find my podcast on a streaming platform near you. We are unfortunately not on YouTube, although it was very fun to visit YouTube today with you. Girls Gone Canon, Canon. We are on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, you name it. Pretty much all the big ones after that as well. And you can find my blog at liesandarborgold.com. That is where I post theories and meta-analysis and different things. I also have a Tumblr, liesanarbor.tumblr.com, where I post some of those same things, but there's some more meta over there from a while back if you're bored during quarantine and gotta get in. Other than that, we release new episodes for Girls Gone Canon every Friday for Song of Ice and Fire, except for the last Friday of the month. And we are doing one episode a month for His Dark Materials.
Yes, everyone's trying to branch out. You guys have got His Dark Materials on lockdown. Girls Gone Canon, obviously a great podcast. Even the ones I'm not on, I would say.
Even when you're not crying about Aemon?
Even when I'm not crying about Aemon, it's totally worth listening to. Chloe and Eliana, two of my very favorite people in the fandom.
Well, we'll have you back for a Sam episode when we get to him finally, and we'll let you cry some more. How about that, Matt?
Oh my God, if you get me on for Aemon's death scenes, holy shit. It would just be nonstop weeping. In exciting news, speaking of Eliana, Maester Monthly recorded an episode, you guys. We recorded an episode. Me, Michael, and Eliana got in there and got the crew back together for the quarantine. That'll be coming out at some point. There were some technical issues with the recording. Don't worry about it. It'll be great when it comes out. As always, you can follow, make sure you like, subscribe, share the stream if you're just coming here for the first time. Coming out next for me, I'm working on a short explainer theory thing talking about the faceless men and their coins and the ideas of identity tied up in those and how it works exactly. Not one of my more involved ones. It's kind of a short thing, but it's super interesting in terms of what it tells you about George's ideas of identity when you lose yours. And then after that, to please Lord Brendan Beefish, I'll be putting out my theory about how, since we were talking about young Griff, how did young Griff and John Connington take Storm's End and the Winds of Winter? I have a different take than Jeff does. It's Jeff approved, though. He very much likes it. I've been sitting on it for like a year, so I'm going to do that one. Next Saturday, I'm just going to keep doing these as long as the quarantine, I think, goes on. Saturday streams around 1 p.m. probably every time. Sometimes just me, sometimes awesome guests like Chloe and Emmett. Sort of depends on how much planning I'm going to do. This one was we threw this one together, but it still came out really great. Mostly because Chloe knows so much about the Danes. And you can also go to my Patreon, patreon.com/JoeMagician, where you can get early episodes, sneak previews, the document for streams. My patrons are able to follow along as we were talking. Patron exclusive episodes, I think I already said that. And access to the Joe Magician Slack, where I got a lot of the questions I pulled from Mary and Sandrixine. That's where they were left. It's basically just like a private chat room thing where we talk about A Song of Ice and Fire, among other things. Really nice little community. Totally worth joining, I would say.
Join up.
Join up. It's all good. All right, so thanks everybody. I'll see you next Saturday. I'm going to try and get that theory out this week. It's written. I just have to record and animate, but it's short, so it should be fine. Awesome. And again, thank you very much, Chloe. This was incredible. I'm glad we finally got to talk about the Danes.
Yes.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful way to spend a Saturday.
One for the tomes.
Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you
Bye,
later.
guys.